together, and I trust everyone had an awesome break with their families and people that they love and cherish, that they were able to enjoy the great New Zealand outdoors in places around Selwyn or around Aotearoa, and that you've come back into this building, into this place, and the work that's in front of us with a sense of enthusiasm, a sense of pride, and for some, still sweating from the work that has been ongoing through the time. So for those that haven't been able to have that break, thank you for the mahi that you've put in to be able to provide us with the information we received today, and will continue to receive over the coming weeks as we work towards having a draft long-term plan ready for consultation with our community in a few weeks' time. As we start the year, I want to acknowledge our mana whenua partners and Ngāi Turua Hiki Hiki ki Tumutu and Ngāi Tuahuriri, and acknowledge their space in looking after this land for generations before us, and we will continue in the tradition of working with them to make good decisions for this whenua and for our people as we move forward. And Megan, coming back into this year, great to have you sitting at the table with us to be able to bring some of those views here and in a new way in this governance space. We're going to hand over to Sharon now to give any opening comments on this work stream that we've got, and then we'll launch into the program of work. Sharon.
So you can see Sam and I are sharing the mic. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Tim Mason, our new Executive Director of Infrastructure and Property. Tim, if you shove your hand up, it's great. So Tim started last week, and I'll do some introductions and a lunch break to councillors. Firstly, I'd like to thank the team. Huge amount of work has been going on over and in between the Christmas and New Year period, and I thank you for that. We very much took on board. We had a workshop before Christmas with you councillors. We presented the very raw data of what potentially the LTP looked like. You gave us some really good feedback and guidance, and this is now a different iteration. So we put in an extra step to ensure that we could have good conversation, and you will see that we have taken that information on board, and you will see as the team take you through the pack that there are some items that have been removed. We have taken an approach around excellence in doing our basics and doing our basics really well, but also allowing for growth. We know that we're a region of growth, and that is not going to change. We know that there are many challenges in terms of cost of living, etc. But the view and the approach that we have taken to this is actually having an eye on the big picture and the long term, and trying to think strategically about it. So we look forward to presenting to you today. We're going to take a whole of team approach, and you'll have a number of people come and talk to the different slides. There is still work to be done, and we fully expect and anticipate that as governors you will give us some strategic guidance as to any iterations that you want to do, and we will have that in time for next week's workshop, where really we know that that's where the rubber hits the road, and that in terms of we need some endorsement ideally going forward in terms of the timelines and the key milestones for the long-term plan. So just really want to be clear, knowing that I think the 31st is our timeline around having that formalised agreement for this long-term plan going out. So thank you, and I'll hand over to you, Jenny.
Lorena, good morning. Today's agenda is, first of all, we're going to start off with a bit of context setting, so refreshing ourselves as we come into the new year, some of the things we covered off last year, and really where we're heading with this long-term plan, and just putting some context around the information that you're going to see later in the pack. The next section we'll take you through is around what we're proposing as the potential big decisions to take to the community, and also other matters of importance that we feel the community either need to be aware of or we would like to have their say on. Following that, we'll go through the finance team on our financial landscape, looking at how the numbers are shaping up, and we'll go from there. What I can say is I know you did receive the pack late yesterday afternoon. There have been some adjustments and changes as we go, so you will see some refreshed information as we work through that. I'll be able to provide you an updated copy of what you see today after this meeting. Okay. So in terms of the context setting, I'm actually going to take us back to our context setting workshop, which I think was in about August last year. And this is just really grounding us back into council's role and in local government and what we do in the LTP and our focus on improving the wellbeings. We went through the outcomes earlier in a couple of workshops late November. So I've just updated those to reflect that, but it's really looking at how we find that balance between our environmental, our cultural and our social and our economic wellbeings. Moving along, just another slide that I'd like to bring forward from what we've discussed previously, and this is based on the advice from Taituara as well. So what does a good LTP look like? And for us, it's understanding our current state today, how we're grounding our position from where we are today, and then how do we move forward from that to get outcomes for our community based around our wellbeings. So just to re-summarise, it's around being outward focused, so understanding what's going on in the environment around us and all those factors that are influencing what happens to us and our communities. Long-term focus, obviously we're looking at 10 years and what we need to achieve. And it's striking that balance. So that's really around getting the balance right between our aspirations, the affordability and what we can achieve during that time frame. And having that one integrated story that sort of takes us through what we're looking to achieve. And as I said before, this is around grounding us in the present, so understanding where we are today so we can move forward from where we are today. Okay, also going back, early community engagement, and we did a bit of work where we looked at where the three voices intersect. So the voice of intent, yourselves as councillors, mana whenua, the legislative landscape that helps guide our intent, lived experience being our community and what their voice and what we heard from them, and also our voice of expertise. So what's the expertise within our teams telling us is a good direction and right way forward. And we had a number of places where there were key intersects. I'm just going to move this because I can't see. So in terms of the intersect of where a number of matters really resonated for all three parties was around the natural environment and protection of our green spaces, water quality, still a very strong theme, very similar to last LTP, safe and effective transport infrastructure. Also the public transport theme came out quite strongly. How we give effect to our te reti and building our partnerships and our relationships. Living affordability, and also how do we keep our communities connected and provide a platform for that. There were some other areas where we had intersects, but I'm just focusing on those for the time being because that was the common ground we found. Since last year, and I'm going to invite some of my colleagues to come up and have and maybe take you through this in a bit more detail. Late last year, it became evident what some of the central government changes were that may impact our LTP. So the three that we've got that are key at the moment, and just to keep you briefed on that, is Three Waters, what's happened with the Resource Management Act, and also really late last year was some guidance in terms of understanding where Waka Kotahi were looking in terms of priorities for funding. So I'm actually going to pass over to Murray England and he can talk around what's been going on in the Three Waters space.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. Good morning, everybody. In terms of the Three Waters reform, that got repealed last year, as we are all aware. And the main change that occurred through that process was the need to include three waters, stormwater, wastewater and potable water into a long-term plan. Council was in a good position. We had already prepared budgets for 10 years and in fact 30 years looking out. And so it was just a matter of us adding those into the rating calculations. There was a letter received mid-December from the Honourable Simeon Brown, giving us some options to council in terms of the long-term plan, which basically included delaying the consultation 3 months, not having an audited consultation document, and also the ability, if you were a council who had already consulted, to add Three Waters in without going out for consultation again. Council's approach is to carry on as normal. There's no need to change our standard processes because we are ready and prepared for this reform change. We just took the same approach with the earthquakes as well, with the ability to delay the LTP, and Council decided to carry on as planned, which is what we're doing now.
I'll ask Tim to take us through the RMA and what's going on in that space.
Thanks, Jen, and good morning, everyone. There's not much to say here other than the RMA is back, but it's likely it will change, and there's likely to be some changes in terms of some short-term wins. It's likely that the RMA and its reforms going forward will be a bit more private property interest friendly. There'll be focuses on infrastructure. There'll be new fast-tracking processes put in place. What did it mean for a long-term plan? We had, I think in year 4 or 5, we had some money in there, about 2.5 million to deal with the new legislation. So we've taken that out. So yeah, it's just watch the space. There will be some changes, but anything there'll be less regulation. And in terms of impact upon our financial state, it's likely not to be significant, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm going to invite Yue to take us through what's going on with Wakatahi and the funding space.
Thank you, Jenny. Kia ora. The change of government puts some uncertainty on our transportation funding. Our transportation annual program roughly is about $60 million, and our subsidy from Wakatahi mostly is 51% on our road maintenance renewal program, all of those, and about half of the CAPEX program. So we are expecting about $20 million of subsidies every year from NZTA. But the government, the change of government have resulted in a few changes regarding both the income stream and also the government priorities. In terms of the income stream, the general fuel tax and RUC increases proposed by Labour has not been put into the plan by the national government. And then the emission trading scheme revenue previously used for vehicle kilometers traveled reduction program and also transportation choices program. So that's cycleway program. Those have been redirected probably to fund the general tax cut. So then for this year, they already canceled the funding for transportation choices program. That is our cycleway program. Those are the changes in the revenue stream. In terms of the government directions, typically a national government would focus more on roads rather than walking and cycling and the public transportation. So there's an allocation of funds in play. So essentially, all our funded programs are at risk. So across the board, either of the reduction in funding or the reprioritization. So the implication for this LTP is that really, first of all, in the consultation stage, we need to let the communities know there is this uncertainty in funding and its subsequent impact on rates. Secondly, because there is a mismatch between the government decision-making timeline and our decision-making timeline, the government decision will come after our LTP decision. So what if our expected revenue does not realize? So there's a decision to be made at the later stage. Thank you.
So our next slide talks to excelling in essentials and supporting growth. And Sharon, you started to touch on these at the start of the presentation. I was wondering if there was anything further you would like to add. Oops.
Sorry, I'm not used to sharing a microphone.
Get in there.
Get in there. Yeah, and again, this is about having heard back from, or taking on board from the workshop, And it's about finding that balance, understanding, that there is a cost of living pressure, that we've got, we want to finish some of the work that we have committed to, do what we said we were going to do. We want to have a look at our carry forwards, in particular around our infrastructure program, because we know in terms of our delivery against some of the key CapEx programs has perhaps not been to the levels that we would like, and we have a history of large carry forward. So we've got some work to do around how we now deliver going forward and how we reduce the carry forwards and how we provide and deliver services on an annual basis. But we have to balance that with knowing that we're a growing area, and the risk is that if we don't get that balance right and we start to take backward steps, we will give ourselves some significant intergenerational challenges. So again, we've tried to find the balance about doing our essentials well, but enabling that we optimize the growth going forward as well.
Thank you. In a couple of the earlier slides, we talked about the LTP and what a good LTP looks like. So this is really around understanding our current state, and Alison's just going to take you through some of those elements.
Thanks, Jen, and good morning. We sort of covered this the last time and sort of recognising going into this LTP that we do have some legacy issues that we have captured as much as we can into these financials. So I'm not going to go through every single one, but in summary, it is on screen. When we get to the financials, we can talk to that in more detail if we need to, but this is the areas that we've identified at this point.
So that's actually the end of our section on context setting. Sorry, Sam, and just carry on. Okay, cool. So the next part is going through to what we're recommending as the matters that we could take out to the community for this LTP. I've got my slide in slightly wrong order, so I'm going to go back up here just to give a quick overview, and I'm going to invite some of my colleagues to come and talk to some of these in a little bit more detail. So at the moment, we have as a stock take, big decisions is around safe drinking water, public transport, and a couple of items around our facilities network. Under community guidance, which is like this is still matters that we want to or recommend taking to the community for consultation, but probably not as large as the big decisions. We have our position on our digital environment and where we're heading in that space. The Sheffield pool, which was raised in the last meeting, and also where we're heading in terms of economic development. And then to the my right-hand side up there too, good. We have a number of matters that we want to make sure that the community are aware of, and these are grounded in things that we know are coming up in the landscape, so potential legislative changes, and also things that have been going on within council, and some things that we've been doing that we probably weren't doing in the last LTP, or we have an update since the last LTP. So there are a number around that, but we'll take you through those in a moment. But first of all, we're going to head to big decision 1, and this is around providing safe drinking water. So I'll invite Joe up to have a talk to us about that.
Kia ora koutou. So as we talked about at the last session, we've obviously got a requirement to provide residual chlorine in our drinking water supplies unless we have an exemption that's been granted from Te Mata Arawai. There are significant costs around moving towards what we're calling intermittent chlorination, which includes capital upgrades and increased operational costs. Our lowest risk option is to continue to operate the supplies with a residual chlorine, and that's staff's recommendation. So residual chlorine gives us protection against an unexpected event. So while the likelihood of the event happening doesn't change, the consequence if we've got residual chlorine is much less, so that's why it's our preferred option. If we are implementing a move to intermittent chlorination, then there'll be no impact on the rates, but sorry, I might have said that the wrong way around. If we stay how things are, then there'll be no impact on the rates. If we do move to intermittent chlorination, then the impact will be $231 per property. We've got 16 or 17 schemes that we believe we potentially could obtain an exemption for. So the capital would be 67 million and 15 million additional operational costs.
Yeah, thanks, Jo. Okay, we're going to move to big decision 2, and I'll invite Andrew and Yue to come and talk to us about public transportation.
Thank you. We're working now. Okay, so it came a fairly clear thing came through the public through the consultation, initial consultation for the LTP regarding public transport services and infrastructure for the district, i.e. people expecting or wishing to have more public transport and having that option for public transport. And in the current LTP, we have provision already for park and ride facilities at Lincoln and also at Rolleston. However, for this draft LTP, we have upped the ante somewhat in that regard, in the fact that we have also included an additional park and ride facility earlier in Rolleston. That is to coincide with the State Highway 1 Rolleston Access Project and the flyover, which will give us improved capability to provide bus routes and PT connections across the state highway in conjunction with our current park and ride facilities at the headquarters here. As Yue alluded to earlier when he was speaking, the decisions by the new government put some hesitancy around what public transport funding may be available. As you've probably seen in the media, for instance, Auckland Light Rail has been axed, Get Welly Moving has been axed, which all had obviously very significant public transport funding components in it. From a Greater Christchurch perspective, I'm not aware at this stage of any necessarily major threat in that regard. However, we're still waiting for information to come from central government in regards to how that may be being seen at the moment. But nevertheless, at this current point for our draft LTP, our preferred option is to pursue a business case process in conjunction with Environment Canterbury to both coordinate services and public transport infrastructure provision together to improve those aspects for both Lincoln and Rolleston. As a quick reminder, legislatively, Environment Canterbury regional councils are responsible for providing PT services, whereas local councils are responsible for providing infrastructure. So we need to work together on this. So at the moment, we have as our preferred option 1, as you can see up there, in terms of that we are working on the basis of carrying forward in terms of pursuing those Lincoln and Rolleston park and rides, and to have those co-funded by NZTA Wakatahi. Option 2, obviously, we could go it alone, but we need to actually exhaust any opportunities and avenues for funding to be able to reach that sort of point and consider that option, which we don't want to push forward with at the moment. And of course, option 3 is not to have anything in the long-term plan. I think that would be a mistake, considering that we've already signalled it in our current long-term plan and our previous long-term plans. And so that is basically where we're at. We're also looking at, in terms of for the aspect of community awareness, through our LTP work, talking to Environment Canterbury in regards to what we can do to increase PT services across the district, in particular the wider district, as opposed to the current focus on the Greater Christchurch part of the district. Of course, again, we hope that that will come through with PT Futures, but we have a wider district out there. And also, as I said, there has been that that view expressed by the community that they wish to have further options in that regard and to connect us up across the wider district and our more outlying townships. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Could I invite Denise and James to come and talk to us about our community facilities network?
Sorry, just to advise that when we've looked at the big three decisions, we will then stop and pause and open the floor for conversation.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Big decisions 3 and 4. The council team proposes to consult on the direction being taken across Selwyn, both in planning for and constructing public facilities and reserves across the district. Councillors will recall a report tabled and discussed at their meeting on the 9th of November on this topic. The topic we're talking about first is around Ellesmere. So if we can. Council knows that the project at Ellesmere has been agreed to and funding has already been set aside by council. However, with the projected cost escalations, council team considered it appropriate to go back to the community for consultation before the construction actually occurs and larger than budgeted costs are incurred. The impact of COVID and the resultant economic constriction has resulted in some cost escalations. Some of the costs are also a result of unanticipated issues such as the need to remediate land on which this facility is planned. These issues have seen a significant resultant uplift in cost to construct such a facility, even with the relatively modest footprint previously approved by council. So we've halted progress in order to get feedback from the community on this uplift. We expect this feedback to go through the long-term plan consulting process. When we discussed this matter at the November council meeting, the council team brought a range of options. I think there were 7 from memory. 4 potential options are now proposed for consideration by Selwyn residents as part of this LTP. One of these options is that we cease the new build project altogether. While we still need, while there are still some costs payable, we still have to pay for the land remediation, and we still have to pay some reasonably costly upgrades to the existing library service centre in Leeston to simply extend its life in a medium term. It is a much lesser amount. The second option, and this is the option that we recommend to council and the community, is maybe we should continue the project as planned, as researched, and as designed to a preliminary stage and be prepared to pay the extra. This is the option that has already had significant cultural design input and for which the name Whātaro has been gifted to council. Option 3 is perhaps considering longer term growth projections. We should be building with a much bolder view to the future, allowing for additional floor space to that originally planned and allowing for community social functions or larger scale meetings or events. With this obviously comes even greater costs, but it looks out to the longer term future of the facility and this community hub for Ellesmere. Or option 4 is maybe we should be considering a more standardised facility that features elements that are easily replicable in other locations across Selwyn. It's worth noting that this option is not a significantly cheaper option than option 2, which is the recommended option, but it may serve a purpose of signalling a different approach to facility design and construction for council's community facilities going on. Council, as I said, has already committed funding to this project, but is now facing significant project cost increases And so therefore the council team suggest it's a discussion and a decision requiring feedback from Selwyn residents into this long-term plan for council to then consider and decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And while we are in the vicinity of Leeston, we also had a conversation around Leeston Park. And I'm just going to invite Murray Anglin to come and talk to us around the options for that.
Right, in terms of Leeston Park, this follows on well from Fosh Road. It's adjoining that site. Three main options. Option one is to do nothing. There's some minor works to do to carry out some health and safety type works, remove or replace old unsafe infrastructure. So that's our lowest cost option. Option two is to carry out some landscape improvements to extend the playing fields, replace and upgrade the playground equipment, footpaths, toilets, and seal the car park. And then option three is basically to carry out the works of the full master plan over a period of 15 years. So the three options there, the council staff recommendation is option three is to do the full master plan upgrade, but to spread those works over a 15-year period.
Thank you. And James is going to talk us through Darfield Recreation Sports Facility.
Kia ora, thanks, Jen. Just by way of background, I think it's important that we revisit how we got to this point. So we really wanted to take a place-based and needs-based approach to what we're doing out in the Melbourne area, bearing in mind that this Sheffield Pool's proposed to be closed and the Darfield Aquatic Centre has just been upgraded as well. We engaged GLG to do some needs assessment, which included quite a lot of community engagement with sports clubs, schools, etc. And the following key things came out. The existing rec centre is a great community asset, but it has significant limitations. One of those limitations is around sports courts. There's a current and unmet demand of one sports court, rising to two over the long term. The report also stipulated that the existing aquatic space is sufficient. Accessibility, though, is the biggest limitation at the moment. Although there's high community interest in Sheffield Pool as well, in this report it did say that it's limited and unviable to keep it operating. And the indoor aquatics provision be considered as part of the long-term plan. As part of the next long-term plan, so it's the longer-term need is there, but not in the existing 10-year window. The proposal is the preferred option is to work through two courts. The reason for that is we have done some work on what one court costs, and we can see up there that it's just over 7 million. If we do that in the initial build and then look to go to the next phase in say 9 years' time, the existing so the additional cost on top of that is another 9 million. So it brings the total cost to 16 million to build two courts. Part of the work will involve looking at the existing facility and what can be done with the existing facility to either strengthen or extend that out as well. So that's the proposal in front of you, and happy to take any questions down the track. Thank you.
James, I wonder if we do Sheffield Pool now because it's linked. Yeah.
Yeah, so carrying on from the other piece of work, Sheffield Pool is now end of life. It's been well discussed in previous meetings about the potential options available to us with that facility. We've gone and got ACOM to basically QS the potential rebuild of that pool. To do the existing pool tub and strengthening and lining that's required is around $850,000. Additional improvements to accessibility and compliance in terms of earthing and things like that of metal structures would bring that project up to around $1 million. Closing and demolishing the site obviously still comes at a cost as well, which is in front of you. It's at $290,000 in terms of asset write-off and demolition. So there's still a cost to that, but it does save ongoing operational costs as we go forward. So that's essentially that for Sheffield Pool.
Thanks, Jean. That brings us to the end of the big decisions stuff. We've got another one that you'd like to talk to.
We've done the big decisions. We've got two more other matters that we think could go to the community for consultation.
Yeah, finish those off.
Do those.
Yep.
Yeah. That's great. And maybe we can have Denise and Shay can talk to us about economic development.
The council team is proposing to consult with the community on council taking an intentional and active role in the development and delivery of an economic development strategy. Obviously, this would be aligned with the future Selwyn whole of council strategy. This would involve council initiating a collaborative and a transparent working environment between council, key partners, the various industries, including the tertiary sector and business sectors. Some of these businesses and industries are already in Selwyn. Some are considering Selwyn, and some are simply open to considering places for further investment that align with their vision and goals. With a few notable exceptions, for example, iZone, the previous approach has been to take a reasonably passive approach to watch and to respond on the basis that somehow it will just happen in a way that meets community aspirations. And at various points in Selwyn's history, it actually did just happen and happen well. But where we are now, at this point in time, Selwyn is exposed to some significant economic vulnerability, stagnation potentially in the local job markets, and a loss of our historic competitive advantages. There's a real need to plan, guide, and facilitate intentional economic development activity and investment. We heard from the pre-LTP community engagement that residents don't simply want Selwyn to simply become a dormitory suburb to Christchurch. A strong push has come from residents for a district in which residents can live, work, and play locally. Residents are keen for local job opportunities and in doing so, fostering a much more connected community. We've heard from the businesses and industries that there are some things that individual businesses alone will just not do. And examples would include when we want to enhance the workforce develop the workforce right across the district. Based on the business and industry feedback today, we recognise a need to create a strong economic identity that builds on Selwyn's competitive strength to attract investment, talent, and to retain and grow local businesses in the district. In summary, some of the earlier points of advantage to Selwyn no longer exist and challenges are looming. We consider we need to get involved and help create further advantages. In conclusion, we absolutely recognise that investment in an economic development strategy needs to come with clear, transparent and ambitious targets that would be routinely monitored and reported on to Council. We expect targets to include job growth in key industries and highly skilled jobs, reduced unemployment, increases in household earnings, an increase in innovative businesses undertaking investigation into and or responding to research and development, increase in business activity right across the district related to small, medium as well as large businesses, an increase in the number of residential and commercial consents issued by Council, an increase in the business sector feedback that suggests that Council is transparent and easy to do business with, and an increase in participation from local businesses in Council projects, suggesting that they see themselves as key drivers of community success. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Denise. And Tim's going to take us through our third one, which is
Digital.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Yes, it's been described as mission critical, and our digital experience, both for our community and employees, probably isn't as good as it could be and should be. So what we'd like to do in this long-term plan is to go out and talk to the community about what their needs are and what they'd like to see happen in this space. So what we're proposing is that over the next year or so, we get a roadmap together. So we haven't got a solution right now, but we'd like to do some work, listening to our community, understanding the organisational needs, and then put to you perhaps in an annual plan or maybe a long-term plan, a solution. So in terms of financial impact, we've put $1.3 million in each of the next 10 years. And obviously that probably could be shuffled around once we get a better idea what a potential solution could be. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of those matters for the
Great.
community.
Thanks, Jen. If you could chuck water chlorination back up there on the screen for us, and councillors, we'll just work our way through those that have been presented so far. There is further presentation work to be done after this, but just while this is at the front of our minds and has been presented to us, let's discuss it now. So big decision one, chlorination. We discussed before Christmas leaving the chlorine in the system is the safest and lowest cost option that we would put to the community, with the numbers provided so that we can hear back from them should they want to pay the extra to remove the chlorine. We know from previous long-term plans that the preference was to have chlorine-free water. So the balance now goes back out to the community through this long-term plan. Did people have reflections or views or things about how the question's been asked here that they would like to comment on and share? Nicole.
Thanks for that. I'm not clear where we are currently at with the Require Huts approval. And I think it's quite difficult for us to go out to the community and asking these questions. I don't think they fully understand the consequences potentially of having a supply that isn't chlorinated. I think, and these are questions that I would ask, is more around the time delay of getting a result with the water we're doing the testing, and to actually pick up a result that's out and start chlorinating, the time lag on something like that can be quite serious. And I think, and there's a question I put through to staff, is how confident are we of continuing down an approach where we don't have that chlorine as a backup? And we're talking some of these, we started with a smaller supply, Require Huts, but when we're talking about the bigger towns, it's a totally different ballgame. So I'm interested to hear that. And if we are wanting to go down this chlorination route, I think we need to specify all these other things in that as well, because there is no appreciation out there, I think, of the risks.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. If I can answer the questions after each councillor, otherwise I'll lose track as we go through. So the first one, Require Huts, where we're at the moment, we've been in negotiations with standard conditions with Taumata Arawai. So the final decision has not yet been made, but we have negotiated conditions and we wait now for the final decision, which we're expecting hopefully will be in the next couple of weeks. So we're not too far away on that. In terms of time lag, yes, if we do E. coli sampling, it's generally a 24-hour turnaround period. So there's a 24-hour delay from when you find out there's an incident to when you can then respond to that. A lot of the costs that we've put through in option 2 is to provide continuous monitoring, so measuring pressure, temperature, pH, conductivity, a whole range of parameters, which we would hope would give us some indication, so we can respond a lot earlier than perhaps we would. Historically, we've put a ball notice on or acted when we've had a number of E. coli counts received. If we move to intermittent chlorination, we'll be responding on total coliforms, not even E. coli being detected, but a lot lower bar. In terms of staff's opinion, we should be sticking with option 1, and that is our preferred option. We don't believe that we should be going towards intermittent chlorination, but there's a lot of community thought on this, and that's why we're going for consultation. But staff's opinion is very clear that option 1 is the way forward.
So you're talking the online testing that you were looking at doing is a lot of what is the cost for the second option of taking the chlorination out. So what sort of online testing have we got at the moment? Because I would have thought the things that you were talking about, that we would already have that in place.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. We started off with chlorine-free water, and then we had a cost increase as we added chlorine to that, and then we're now looking at another cost increase to take it back out again, which is obviously, I think it's a wee bit hard and anti-intuitive to explain. But with the addition of chlorination, we do have a lot of analyzers in our network which measures free available chlorine continuously, but also some of those other parameters as well. I think everything just ratchets up another gear. So, sampling will be more frequently. So instead of taking E. coli samples maybe once a week, in some schemes it could be daily, or in some schemes twice daily. So there's those sort of costs that get added on there. It's just the quantum of online samplers that would install in addition to what we already have. So we've got a very vast and well-formed SCADA system at the moment. So we are doing, I think, better than best practice. But to move to being intermittent chlorination, we're going to have to be even more so than that.
Sharon?
Just want to add in that the cannot underestimate the complexity. So the likes of Rakaia huts is, I say, straightforward or reasonably straightforward. That's not to say that the remaining drinking water supplies would be that straightforward, and there would be a very high degree of complexity associated with dechlorination. And so while the dollar figure is there, that is, the risk would be that Te Mata Arawhai would come back with different expectations for each of the 17 different supplies, because there's different complexities associated with each supply. And so the likelihood is that the cost actually may continue to grow depending on the criteria and the caveats that Te Mata Arawhai would come back with. Is that correct, Murray?
Yes, no, that's 100% correct. And I think if we ever were non-compliant for any of our schemes, well, then we'd lose that exemption and we'll be starting again. So there's a high risk with option 2. Just quickly, some of the costs would be, we renew our pipelines. Everything has its sort of birthday, and we renew prior to that. So we were already renewing early our assets to make sure we have a high performing asset base. But if you go to intermittent chlorination, we'll be renewing those even on a shorter basis. So there's a whole lot of costs that get wound into that number 2 option.
Thanks, Nicole. Deborah?
Thank you. Look, it's my understanding that one of the biggest industries that we have in Selwyn at the moment with a certain industry is the installation of chlorine removal at the gate and both nitrate for safe drinking water, especially in our rural communities. And the cost of those have actually come down in cost because of the demand that we actually have. Look, chlorine's not kind to everybody, right? So I think we have another option that should actually, as a public good matter, we should be able to tell our communities what other options are available for chlorine removal at the gate. It would be nice if we could cost that for them. If that's, if that's what we're looking for in the future of how we manage our safe water supply. So that to me is a third option that I think should be added to this chlorination debate. No, everyone's not going to agree with me, but it's an education one. It's exactly going out and saying, look, this is a third option we have considered, and we'd like your feedback on it. Remember, this is their plan. We're only putting out suggestions, and I would like that third option to actually be made available. And it may be also helpful that if we're looking at water resources, we're actually doing it for rural communities that have a really high nitrate in their drinking water. There's a crossover. We have Environment Canterbury, who manages our water resource, but that's the biological side of it. It's the water source delivery for us to all have safe drinking. And that's what I'd like is consideration of a third option. The other is impact on rates. Hey, we may have a community out there like Rakaia huts that you know, that are quite prepared to come along and pay a differential for that removal. And what we've got is no change to option 1, but option 2, impact on rates. And we've got this through a lot of our decisions. XX, what is the impact on rates? What's the percentage that's going to impact on our rates? We've got further on in this document, targeted rates separated out from general rate, but at the end, so I'm looking at the third option here, which is an education model option that people may be able to choose, but we should be able to help people choose. We should be able to be prepared to pay to give them the information to make those choices and to choose. And
Awesome.
if it's going to cost us something, it's for the community to decide, not us.
Cool, thank you, Deborah. So in terms of your option 3, I might break into a part A and a part B. So in terms of education, I think that's something that staff can do quite quickly and not even necessarily part of the LTP, but put up an educational piece on a website saying these are the kind of devices that you need to remove chlorination. So carbon filter, remove chlorination. Nitrates is probably a bit more tricky, whether it's reverse osmosis or other means. And then you can do an whole house sort of situation, or you can do a below the bench type matter. So in terms of the education piece, I think that's something we should just do, and we can put that up on our website over the next month, I think. The part B, I think I picked up saying, you know, could there be some sort of funding for those devices or a target rate? Strongly recommend against doing that, just because, well, I think different people will want different levels. Some people don't even care if they have chlorine or not. There's the matter of replacing filters, and is council going to be responsible for that? So I think just the renewal of those assets and individual properties would just be a logistical nightmare, administration nightmare to try and work through. So I wouldn't be supporting that, but definitely the education piece I think is a great idea.
My other question was around what's the percentage rate cost? Because
Yes.
in a lot of these documents.
It was just about the document timing. So they're on the screen now, and as they're presented today, the numbers are all there for us. It's just they weren't available yesterday when the numbers were circulated.
So the impact of option 2 is $231 per year per property. And that's because that work is debt funded over a period of time. Let's just put that rate down.
Thank you. Sophie.
Yeah, kia ora team. Thank you very much, everybody, for all the work, everybody who's speaking and sitting in the background there. I guess it's interesting. The first reaction that I think a lot of people might have to looking at option 2 would be the sort of thing that Deborah was mentioning about, what about community by community? I think that would be a very difficult one to ask or to answer, because you'd literally be locking in future homeowners into something that they've got no choice over. And potentially I could see that turning into a bit of a them and us type thing. There's a bit of a reason why we use uniform rates for a lot of things and targeted rates. So I do like it. I'm just wondering if how much discussion there would be around why these options are the way they are. Obviously you can't put in like 70 pages worth of references, but it might be worth explaining that sort of thing, if I've got it right. And in terms of treatment options at the gate, that's already a personal choice thing. And I suspect that we're already finding that there are people who are putting it in if they can afford it, if they want to. That is already their decision. There's information out from places like Consumer New Zealand to tell you which ones are good and help you choose. You can go straight to a company if you want. A large number of us will never be able to afford treatment at the household level, and I'm quite happy, you know, as a personal level, to just know that the water's been treated and it's safe. That saves me from worrying about belly bugs and all that sort of thing. And in terms of nitrates, that's a whole nother ball game. But you know, this is a national thing. We've got to just figure out what is the scope of what we can do for our district, and in terms of the wider stuff, it's Te Mara Arawa and the government's decision. Yeah, kia ora.
Cool, thank you, Sophie. I'm not sure if there was a question there, but we've taken on board your comments, which is appreciated. Thank you.
Hi, just want to gauge from you, Murray, option one, which you've put as your preferred option. I just want to ask what's the reasoning around why that's your preferred option? Is it the cost or is it the current concern over the water quality that we have at these 17 water sources that may be able to go on for an exemption if that's the direction that we take? My second question is, if Te Matua Arawai came back with the new government and said, we'd like to leave it to each council to have at their discretion to choose, could that potentially alter your options 1 or 2? Because obviously before Te Matua Arawai made this a national jurisdiction, we didn't have any problems with our water with these, obviously the 17 water sources that are going to be eligible for an exemption. And we've already identified a lot of areas of making them as high in a safe quality as possible without pre-chlorination. So just wanting to ask those 2 questions. Are you clear about what I was asking there?
I shall give it a go, and you can correct me if I misinterpret. So in terms of the why, cost is obviously is an aspect to that. I think it's important to make it clear that we're not saying that our water is unsafe at the source. So because we take the raw water and we treat it. So post treatment, the water is safe, and then it enters into our reticulation, and that's where we use chlorination. So for us, it's ensuring that if there's a breakage in the pipe, we have a reduction of pressure, and there's some contaminate sucked into the pipe, the chlorine's there to resolve those sort of issues. So we're not using the chlorine to treat the water per se, but it's there to ensure that the water remains safe within our reticulation. And we are a growth council, so there's many developments that are joining into our network. We have, Enable and Chorus putting in cables and all sorts of things, and so that asset strike, which is one of the big risks. Backflow, we've now taken away the ability to take water from hydrants, but that was an issue of backflow concern. But there's a whole lot of things that could happen in the reticulation that chlorine is there to protect the end user for. So that's the main why. There's also a cost, but the main reason is making sure the water is safe from the treatment plant all the way through to your tap in the house. Interesting question was your second question. So council went through a risk-based approach prior to those changes in legislation, and we identified the highest risk suppliers which we needed to bring into chlorination straight away. I think we're now landed with quite a different question. Before it was, should we add chlorine? But the question we're now asking, what you're asking is, should we take chlorine off? And so you're taking a supply which is now the safest it could be, and then you're trying, then the council needs to decide, are we happy to take on extra risk to take it out? So before the decision was the other way around, we've got a supply with some risk. Should we make the risk less by adding chlorine? Whereas now it's changed, saying, should we make this supply more risky by taking it out? And I think that's a much harder argument to work through.
Thank you. Grant. As you know, I was probably one of the stronger proponents for non-chlorination of water. But I'm also a realist, and I realise that a lot of information we didn't have we do have now, particularly Te Matua Arawai's attitude to non-chlorination of supplies is very, very strict. The uncertainty around water reform is now before us. We've gone through quite a painful period and got ourselves into a pretty comfortable position. My personal view is we should take this question out altogether or defer it for 3 years, because what is the benefit of going through this process again when logic would dictate, even if half the community said, yes, we're not going to spend 67 million. Why ask a question we already know the answer to? Why not save ourselves the trouble, save the staff the trouble, take that question out, and at best, defer it for 3 years. Let's see where the water reforms go. Let's see what the new government says about water reform. Because there still may be some element of water reform which may just dictate that all supplies are chlorinated. So I think we're opening ourselves up for a lot of angst, a lot of work for the staff and for the community for a little gain. So I would just take it out. Leave it alone. Business as usual until the next LTP. Then if there's a burning desire to do something, we'll at least know what the water reforms are and we can do something.
Yep.
Thanks, Grant. Shane.
Kia ora, said, e te whare tūnei, a te rākoe. pa te hono tātou hono, te hunga mate, haere atu rā. Mana whenua, tēnā koe. Koro matua, Sam, tino whakahaere, Sharon, kai kauni hira, arohe o ai kirikiri, ngā mihi o te tauhau, a kaimahi, kai kauni hira, arohe o ai kirikiri, ngā mihi o te tauhau. Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you. I think, Grant, you nailed it there. And I reflect on a number of sayings. One of them is, we've come too far not to go further. And the other one is, Murray Lemon, great quote of councillors don't have the opportunity or the luxury of making a decision in isolation. And number two is somewhat in isolation. And I'm supportive of of the option one to continue the status quo. And from what I heard from Grant, we're already there. Does big decision number one even need to be a part of the LTP? It's been decided. We're continuing along with it. I'm totally supportive of it, and making anything more complicated at this point in time, coming up to big decisions that we're really making, looking at increased costs on, it doesn't need to be there. I've written a couple of other bits and pieces. I just want to say well done for continuing and applying for and with the Rakaia huts. It certainly is a, yay, but certainly our duty of care to our public requires us to think for the 87,000 or 90,000 people and those in the future, rather than particularly ourselves, or the smaller communities. So I'm supportive of option one, Murray and your team. Kia ora. Kia ora koutou.
Thanks, Shane. Phil.
And I had my light on, I turned it off, and I turned it back on once Grant spoke. I'm supporting what Grant said, but I think there's probably the next step beyond that is we need to have some communication around why we wouldn't be asking it. So I think you're absolutely right, Grant. It shouldn't even be in there, because the decision wasn't ours in the first place. We're basically saying, do we want to spend 672 million, whatever the figure is, to do it. But I think this goes into decision number two as well. It's something else that Councillor Miller said some wisdom in the other room. Maybe on the things that we have no control over, we need to slow down and stop. In decision two, we're going to be asked to make some decisions around something that we don't even know the answers for yet. We need to wait for the government to come up with what they're going to do. The same way we need to find out what the water services are going to be doing. We don't know what Te Mata Arawai is going to decide tomorrow. They may say no chlorine. We don't know what whether the overpass is going to happen across this, so we can't have a conversation about the how much money we support in the expenditure of bus stops and park and ride. The same way we don't know if we're not going to be funded 49%, our decisions are going to be different, and we should just stop. Let the government catch up with us. If it means that our LTP process gets delayed, as Grant said, the world's still going to turn around. Maybe it's something that we defer for a year and it comes part of our annual planning stuff. I think with the risk that we're running about making decisions with an unclear or wobbly playing field are really, really risky. So thank you, Grant, for bringing all that stuff up.
Murray.
Yeah, I was going to say as I move back to my seat, just thanks to and a shout out to Catherine and Joe, who've done a lot of work in the background to pull this information together, the costings, etc. So I'm here as the talking head, but these ladies have done a lot of the work in the background, so just acknowledging them.
So this is in the consultation document as it is proposed for us today to have this sort of discussion. So it's good that we're having it. There is. I hear the direction, and thanks for raising it, because this is the challenges that we need to have. But we also can't. There's a couple of things you've said, Phil, that I think we need to also think. We can't just not make decisions because of uncertainty. So we're always going to have uncertainty. That's the environment that we live in, and we're always going to need to be able to make good decisions for our community in spite of the uncertainty that surrounds us. Not just get caught up in uncertainty and be paralysed to not move Selwyn District forward. So not that is necessary about water, but like as a philosophy for us as a council, let's be aware that we live in an uncertain time with uncertain legislation, and we have to continue to step forward into that. For this particular decision, we have told our community that we will go through an exemption process, and many in our community are expecting us to walk through an exemption process one by one. And so to change course and shift that decision, I think our community deserves to be well informed as to why we would do that. And so whether that needs to be a big decision that we're asking them up front, or whether it's an information piece that we're telling them, we know you thought we were going to do this, but we're now changing our mind and we're not going to pursue. We still need to keep it in the long-term plan as a matter of information for the community, whether or not we're going to ask this big question right at the front end. Sharon, do you have any views on where it sits? Just the right hand, you're on.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Thank you. Sorry, I like the sound of the bell. Apologies. Yeah, look at again, the decisions here are just proposals for you to give us guidance. And it is right. Yes, central government is making some decisions, but it's also about what is right for us at a local level too. And absolutely, given the direction of travel we've indicated in previous long-term plans around applying for exemptions, if governors decide that you don't want it to be a big decision, that is absolutely fine. We can transfer into the third stream, which we have not yet presented to you, which is about continuing to keep our community well informed. And we can pull the narrative over to there to explain why we're keeping the status quo.
Can we explain it away in the sheer fact that we're still sitting there with the first supply still not confirmed where that's sitting?
That can be part of the commentary, but
that's what I'm meaning, because I mean, it's just a ridiculous situation. I mean, that's supposedly the easiest one to get done, and how long we're talking about, and it's just an impossible task. And I totally agree with Grant, but I've made it quite clear before on my opinions about the chlorination thing anyway. So
this public health aspect, we're in this tricky balance, because I think if I'm going to say this, and I could get shot down in flames from Wellington or Tamata Arifai, if you asked me from what I've seen to date in terms of the conversations around Rakaya huts, I would 99.99% say it is likely that we will gain the exemption, and that will come out possibly in the next 2 weeks.
I think,
but just because we get an exemption, it doesn't mean to say that we should, and that's really important in this. So, and yes, we would absolutely be the first territorial authority to gain exemption in the country. So we're in this fine balance, and therefore I'm putting myself out on a limb saying 99.99% sure that we would be the first to get that exemption. So no, we couldn't put that narrative in, knowing hand on heart that we're probably going to get that confirmed in 2 weeks.
I know, but the difference between that scheme and any of the others is quite marked, and it's not representative of that we will be able to get any of the other schemes done as well.
That's quite correct, which is why I made the point before, is that whilst, because Rakaya is a very different and very different context, the other 16 schemes are quite complex. But of course, as soon as it becomes known that we have one exemption, then there becomes an expectation potentially from our community. And so, there are some benefits, whether you wish to leave it as a big decision or whether you wish to put it in there for information only, in terms of we want to wait and watch, and in the meantime we're going to remain chlorinated. It really doesn't matter to us. We just want that guidance as to what is your preferred option.
And I think we just also need to remember what this whole process is about, which is hearing from our community. And so the decision that we make next week, when this comes in front of a decision-making space rather than today, which is a workshop to understand the work that's gone on, is what things do we want to put to our community to hear their voice on, and what opportunity do we want to be able to speak into this stuff. And so that is what we're up for here. That is what we've been elected to do, and a long-term plan is about enabling communities, whether we like what they tell us or not, whether we believe what they tell us or not, whether we think the numbers outweigh the information that we might already have. That's a key part of living in a democracy where people's voices get to be heard through this conversation. If it stays, it's going to be in the document somewhere. There's some wording here that I think we need to think about, because around the rates needs to have included in the proposed rates rather than no changes to current rates, because there is changes to current rates in the proposal, but it's all in the proposal. Option one, or whatever we end up telling the community based on the conversation today, is that we keep treating all drinking water supplies with chlorine, but noting that it's the safest and lowest cost solution for our community. So like put some of that detail in that has been talked about in the room here so far, and also be really explicit that we would not progress any exemptions, because that's the outcome of this. Is if that's the route that we're going to decide to take, then let's tell the community the route and what that actually entails. And at the moment, they're expecting exemptions one after the other. If we're going to change that, let's tell them we won't be going through an exemption process as it flows on. Grant.
No, you probably answered the question, Sam, because I was under the impression we were deciding today. So there's another meeting where you want us to vote on these things in or out.
Yes, that's correct. So we put in an extra step, knowing because of the workshop. So today is for you to give us some guidance so we can bring the final document to you next week. And so, you know, if your guidance.
But there's still the opportunity to say, if we say out next week, it's out.
Yeah, if you say it's out today, it's out. If it's out next week, it's out. We just want your guidance as to, would you like us to consider taking it out, and we can bring a document forward with it removed?
I mean, we're required to provide potable water at the gate to a standard that's consumable. We're doing that, and I just going backwards through all that, being pulled through a gorse bush backwards again doesn't seem to any point, because we're not going to change it.
Again, Malcolm?
Yeah, it's a vexed question. I seem to remember when Te Mara ROI was set up and the whole regulation of the drinking water standards, there was agreement from the then opposition for that piece of legislation, and that the opposition is now part of the government. So I can't see them removing those regulations. Public safety, you look at leptospiriosis and the other problems we've had in Hastings, which was in the time of that particular party being in power as well. So I think I don't think we're going to see a change, but I do think there is an expectation amongst our community that we have given them in the last year, that as we were strongly opposed to chlorination, I hated in my water, that we would seek exemptions. We have to be transparent, and this is being transparent, giving them the opportunity to see the cost. People think, oh, you would just turn it off. It's cheap. Well, it's not. It's nearly it will be 70 million by the time it happens. And 70 million. And when you go into the financials in the next few pages, it brings it home to roost. So I think we have to leave it there. I think we have to leave option 2 in. People need to know the cost. Otherwise, they'll make it up, and we'll have misinformation, and we'll have misinformation pandered from the misinformation agents that are out there with their private radio channels at the moment, and they'll be going over time. So information is king.
Thanks, welcome, Lydia.
Yeah, I understand sort of both sides of this, and that, you know, it's hard because we signalled away to our community in saying what we were going to do around the exemption piece. And, you know, it's possibly going to be for a lot of them that it's actually too hard and it's a no. But I think that we should actually hear from our community. But around this, I think we should be clear around what those schemes are that are available for that, because I don't want to see some of our rural schemes that are never going to get exemption and people submitting and thinking that it's a possibility for them. Because there are some that are never going to come into this. And so, yeah, I guess it's around whether it stays as this big decision or if it's more of for community information that we should be clear around what it might apply to.
So what we have in front of us is sort of a summary of the question, but the consultation document itself goes into more detail about what schemes are. And I'm not sure this is worth just rattling through. There's only 17, so it shows, yeah, okay. From the top, alphabetical order. Claremont, Darfield, although I would say that's a township, the rural part possibly not. Dunsandel, Giles Road, Kirwee, Leaston, Lincoln, Prebbleton, Rakaya Huts, Rolleston, Southbridge, Springston, Taitapu, Taumutu, Tiparita, Upper Sound Huts and West Mountain. So I can't recall the ones that aren't, but it's things like Castle Hill, Arthur's Pass, the 4 rural water supplies, which Melbourne Hills, Hartley's.
But like you have those in a risk matrix. So, you know, I wonder if it's whether actually putting them in the rank so that people actually understand where they are. For the likes of Darfield, I think is right at the bottom.
Yeah, correct. In terms of list of priority care, we'll start with the smaller schemes, probably Claremont first, and then work our way through those.
Sophie?
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, I do think it should stay in. I think we're at a risk of predetermination accusations otherwise. And also the new government has only really said that they are looking at change it or doing 3 waters legislation. From memory, they haven't said anything about changing drinking water standards. So that's as far as I'm concerned, it's probably still standing.
Fitting in on the back of what Lydia said, I think obviously we can put things in the LTP documents that are going out to the public, but I feel like it would be good to get that conversation started now with this putting a big article in the Selwyn Times that outlines the areas. And it would be really important for the community to understand as much information in detail as possible along the lines of which area, like the kind of length of lists and the kind of things that you're going to need to apply for in each area and the likelihood of achieving that and the cost per area. Because I think the more informed choices and decisions we can give the people, the much more sensible solutions are going to come out with. If we keep it, you know, very loose, then like Lydia said, people are going to be submitting on this, even though they might not even be an area that's affected. They might not be one of the lucky 17. I also was just thinking, you know, we're not taking into consideration the environmental long-term costs and effects of this for us with, as Malcolm said, he's having to buy water. You buy water, it comes in plastic bottles. I mean, we've got to consider the whole view of what the ultimate changes are here. And I think it's important to actually think about what's the byproduct of our decisions, and plastic waste is a huge issue for us and will be an ongoing increasing concern. So, you know, let's try and consider some of those things in there. Also, up in a lot of the cities, they have unchlorinated public bore water where people can go and get artesian well water. And I think if we do face the chance of everything being chlorinated, can we not have one highly tested, highly monitored artesian well in the district where those that are highly affected by chlorine have somewhere where they can go and get water and fill up with their reusable bottles and not have to be lining up at the supermarket buying millions of plastic bottles?
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm wondering if for next week we could have what it looks like in Big Decision 1, which we've got, and what it looks like when it's in for community information. We can see the two and then make a decision around how that sits, because I think it's the other information that sits behind this that we're all wanting to share in the room, which you've actually got already, but we haven't seen what that looks like. So for next week, if we've got the two options, we can pick one of them and move forward on it. Thanks. Big Decision 2 is the getting around piece, Murray. No, right, Andrew, sorry. What's it, Murray? Thanks, Murray. Councillors, on this Big Decision 2, where it sits, you can see what the preferred option is, and the rates sit on screen there. For those that didn't see it earlier, we still don't have the option 3 piece because of the uncertainty that sits in there. Sharon?
I just want to add, just feeding back in, and the reason why we put this as a proposal through into the Big Decision was that from the pre-engagement information that we received through from the community, public transport was quite a not quite, it was a very strong topic. And that's, the pre-engagement with the community demonstrated to us the community desires around that. So that was our driver behind putting this in.
Thanks. Nicole.
Thanks for Andrew. Interesting. Option 1 is basically got the caveat about receiving co-funding from Waka Kotahi. Now there was that big amount of money last year. And my understanding is theoretically we were going to get some of that, but I guess we're not. Yeah. Current park and rides, what is capacity that's already in there at the moment? The one that I'm more thinking about is the one here. And so from where I look, that the car park seems full, but how much of that is actually park and ride people, or is it all staff? And my thoughts around this is having one of my own other hats on is the whole looking at alternative methods of getting to work for some of the staff, as opposed to, I'm just trying to look at how we save money on that park and ride type thing. I'll be able to push that back. Interested in your comments.
So, before we dive into that, there's a whole lot that goes on with park and ride, and what is it, and where they all are, and where they need to be, and how does that function in the current locations. The question for today is this a long-term plan, public consultation matter, and is it a big decision? And are these the types of options that we want to put to our community, or as Deborah highlighted before, is there other options that we haven't included here that need to be there? So, there's some detail to that question that I don't think we want to get right into now, but if there's some feedback you've got on what the preferred options are here and whether you think there's things missing from this, that would be helpful for this discussion today.
I think there's still questions that I want to hear the answers to. Whether I hear them today, I mean, as far as you're concerned, obviously not, but I'm putting those out there because that does actually affect on options going forward.
Andrea, there's some things that Nicole's raised that you want to just touch on?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's pretty obvious that the current park and ride out there is well used. Whether it's used specifically just for park and ride for the metro services is another question. We know that Sydney sometimes park in there, and also probably spill over from staff as well. The point being, though, even if you take those factors away, going forward, there is insufficient capacity if we want to utilise public transport more for Rolleston and Lincoln. Also, I'd like to just point out that while we talk about Lincoln and Rolleston Park and Rides, they're actually district facilities in that people from wider areas in the district can actually travel to those park and rides, park there and catch the necessary bus services into Christchurch, so they don't have to drive that component. One of the issues that we have got, and this is part of the process going forward with Environment Canterbury over the next couple of years, is actually working out the specific or the required capacity for those park and rides so that we have a more definitive understanding of that. But that's also obviously tied into patronage uplift. It's also tied into what frequency services uplift that there will be. So it's quite a complicated set of parameters to work out what we actually need. And we need to do that. I would have to say that what we've done at the moment is we've brought forward what was indicated in PT Futures as being required at that higher level of detail. We've adjusted and increased the cost for those facilities based on recent, obviously, cost and inflationary pressures. But also we've included in there the cost of our land as well, which we did not have in the current LTP. So we have got in there a whole cost approach. And this is why obviously it's important that we work very hard to get and attract that Whakatahi NZTA funding, because this will be pivotal in being able to, demonstrate the appropriateness and affordability under that whole PT Futures public transport scheme for Greater Christchurch.
Thanks, Andrew. Deborah.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. You've just touched on our Greater Christchurch partnership arrangement with regards to transport issues. And given that ECAN is also a lead agency in transport issues. And throughout this particular process, I'm conscious that our ratepayers do actually pay ECAN rates separate from district rates. And to me, it's important that we work out so our ratepayers aren't being stung twice for the same projects. Or being costed, so there's no double dipping. I'd like to know what portion responsibility is ECAN responsible for this?
Deborah, Andrew mentioned that at the very start of when he presented it, that ECAN provides the services and we provide the infrastructure. That was part of the initial presentation.
But I was also of the understanding that there were discussions that were happening at this level in the transport space through the Greater Christchurch Partnership. Maybe I misheard that or misread it. And I just wanted to know what their contribution was. If it's zero, can you please explain to me why there is a difference between years 1 and 3 and 4 and 10? 4 and 10 with the impact on the rate? I would have thought that you work out that you purchase the land, you develop the land, we may already have the land, and consequently, I don't see why a project should then double in the first 4 to 10 years after it's actually been planned. And a lot of land through the Lincoln Structure Plan and even in Rolleston over the way has already in the past been sort of earmarked and set aside for our park and ride. So quite frankly, with so much information that's been presented to us in the past and what we've got now, I just want to understand how we have that differential in the rating impact with options 1 and 2, because it is major for general rate funding.
Andrew?
Well, obviously, I hope it's option 1 includes the fact that the cost is hopefully going to be subsidised by 51% by NZTA. So therefore, the impact on rates will be less compared to option 2, which is working on the assumption that we would be then fully funding those facilities. So I think that's the main point in terms of difference. In years 1 to 3, the 4.5 million reflects the first park and ride off the rack, as it were, being at Lincoln, and then years 4 to 10 include the 2 park and rides at Rolleston, the one on Kidman Street tied in with the proposed flyover, and then the other one on Jones Road in terms of providing that extra capacity at that point and tying into the iPort commercial development. In regards to your other questions, I think it's also important, as Sam reminded us, that ECAN are responsible for funding services, and that's funded. They get co-funding from Whakatahi directly for that. We fund the infrastructure, and hopefully we get the co-funding for that. And that's always the way that it's worked, and that's why it will continue to work, apart from where we may want to diverge in terms of, as I said before, investigating what potential public services, PT services, we could provide on a wider district basis, but then we would have to follow in a business case process on that and work in with ECAN and also Whakatahi NZTA in terms of attracting any funding, if possible, to make that work.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And thank you for that, Andrew. And Deborah, you will see, and councillors, you will see when we get to the section around community awareness, there is a title in there about district-wide public transport. Again, reflecting back that that's what we've heard very strongly for our community, and we've put a small amount of funding in there to investigate what would that actually look like within the district? Because we're hearing our community want greater connectedness. They want greater support to be able to travel within our own district and into the central points.
Yeah, that does help.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. You answered Deborah's question quite thoroughly, so it answered quite a few of my questions. So one of the things that we often get is the community coming to us and just saying we can't believe the amount of what this project is that the council are putting out, and they're always querying how something like a park and ride, 3 park and rides can cost 4.54 million plus 11.26 million. When you think we can build, we're not even looking at that kind of money for Wharau. So I think obviously you've put in the land cost as well and the purchase cost in there. Will there be a breakdown what you submit to the community so they can see the potential cost of the land purchase costs versus the other cost? And do we have, like usually when you go and build something, you'll get 3 separate costs. When you put it out to tender, you get 3 separate costs from 3 different companies. Have we already done that? Or is this just a sort of a guesstimate of the cost? Is there any chance that this will be shaved down in the interim?
Working backwards on your questions. Basically, the cost estimates are originated from all the cost estimates that were produced for the Greater Christchurch PT study. And so, as I said before, we've inflated those to cover costs, increased costs and inflation, and also obviously the land costs. I think it would be probably not a good idea to provide breakdowns of the nature that you're talking about, because at the moment, those are internalised costs in terms of land values and things like that of our own land. But as I said before, we work through a process to develop a business case over the next couple of years in conjunction with Environment Canterbury, with all their services aspects. Those costs will be better understood. So then for the next long-term plan, we can bring those in more accurately, for want of a better term. But at the moment, it's a good placeholder in terms of making sure that we've got this accounted for and that sort of general level of funding that we expect is needed. So that does that answer your question? Yep.
Kia ora, thank you very much for your in-depth knowledge as ever about public transport services and how we get that moving. I'm wondering whether it would be possible to have like an option 4 or an option 2.2 something. If the Waka Kotahi funding doesn't come through, so that we are doing the upgrades, even if we're not spending. I'm presuming that the park and rides are a big capital cost, but the upgrades presumably could still be used regardless of whether or not. Yeah, that's so that something is still moving forwards. At roughly how much perhaps we'd be rating for if Waka Kotahi were funding with us, just not sort of cutting the whole project off at the knees and just having a partial option as opposed to just, oh, well, if they're all or nothing sort of.
It probably is more of a case of all or nothing, because basically what the research has shown that if you, for a park and ride facility to attract people to use it, it has to be safe, secure, well lit, paved, etc., etc. If you do a type of scenario out there that we have at the moment where Synlait uses it, you're not going to attract the people that you want to use it. And we're not talking park and ride just for people to park cars. We're talking for facilities that people can walk to, can cycle to, that have got the confidence to lock up their bikes and things like that, and they come back and they don't find their car broken into. So it's one of the things that through the PT Futures business case process that we've identified, and particularly around the MRT component. If I remind the council that obviously the MRT business case process agreed on providing MRT within Christchurch, but it wasn't justified to extend out to the districts. But one of the points that entailed is that then more investigation needs to occur in terms of providing direct and express bus services combined with what they call enhanced park and ride facilities, so that we really get that uplift on patronage on the basis that people have got a good facility to use and that, you know, as I said before, they feel safe and confident in using it and it's convenient.
Yeah, I guess so the wording's got build new park and ride facilities and upgrade public transport infrastructure. So I was kind of wondering, like, if there's portions of that is upgrading bus stops so that more of them have a shelter, or that there's a safer pullover bay so that the buses are out of, you know, that sort of work that presumably could still potentially go ahead.
Right. Now,
for along existing bus routes.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So included in these costs and within our public transport response is an annual upgrade program for our bus stops, and that's 180K a year. And so that's for providing new bus shelters, real-time information systems and things like that. And again, that was part of the deal, if you want to put it that way, in regards to council's commitment to PT Futures, that we provided those upgrades of our bus stops, just the same as Waimakariri are doing, so that we get that improved level of service. So that it's already dialed in.
Thank you. Shane, you're the last one, and then we're going to break for lunch.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, I'm supportive of staff's direction. We've made a commitment, and in order for us to continue to be a sustainable, connected, enabling district, option 1 does provide that. But I wonder if option 1 and 2 are a bit of a blend, where if the Waka Kotahi funding isn't captured, that the option 2 is, you know, funding from rates 100%, but the staging of it is stretched out over a period of time. And then perhaps the option 3 is explore other options that are mentioned further on, collaborations with some other outfits. And just a question on does the transport choices cutting of that funding have any effect or the potential?
Yeah, thanks, Shane. I think the thing is that the program for providing the park and ride facilities is timed along with the PT Futures overall program. So we've got the current sort of network upgrades that they're doing within Christchurch at the moment, then the rest of the network, which covers the rest of Greater Christchurch, and then obviously the MRT. So the likes of the Lincoln Park and Ride is staged and timed to coincide with the services and frequency uplift that they're planning for more direct services. And that's combined also, or can make that happen with the Mayo Drive extension. So that gives effect to all of that. And for the Rolleston ones, that's sort of hinging around, again, the Rolleston Access project, the flyover, and so that we're coordinating with that. So I understand about being able to perhaps stretch things out, but that's at the moment the thinking that way.
Thank you.
And in terms of transport choices, that was more to do with walking and cycling projects, rather than PT necessarily, as we're sort of hitching our wagon to PT Futures at Greater Christchurch.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to adjourn now and then come back after a break. Just remind everyone, we've got this time today to talk about this, but we're coming back to it next week. So we don't have to land everything now. This was about giving everyone a chance to give some feedback on the work that has been done to date. And there's going to be an opportunity for everyone to have this added benefit of a week thinking about it and coming back with other thoughts next week too. So let's adjourn. It's 1:45 with a half an hour and start at 1:15. finished public transport, big decision 2. There was no major changes from what has been proposed other than the option of what that was raised was around whether there's a halfway house. We don't get all of the Whakakotahi funding. Andrew will consider that, but it sounded like it was an all or nothing approach, and those 3 options cover the scope that would be required. Big decision 3. Jen, if you want to click to the next 3 and 4, and we'll deal with them just one at a time. So the first one on your slides is 3A. We're talking facilities for Ellesmere and Whatuaro. They were discussed through before, and you've heard now what the options 1 through 4 are. Shane gives his apologies. He's unable to be with us for the afternoon. So what are the councillors' thoughts on these 4 options? Do they cover the range of things that we need to have feedback from the community on? Is there an option that isn't there that you think the community is going to want to hear from us about? And yeah, anything else that you'd like to say around this being a big decision for the long-term plan? So the options are about right then? Malcolm.
Yeah, I'm somewhat dismayed. I'm looking back at this document here called This Way, our last LTP, and we had a budget of $9.19 million. 4.63 funded for the library component and 4.56 for the community services rate. And I remember when this was put together, probably in 2020, there was a concept plan that came, big flash concept plan came to us and actually had, if I remember rightly, was a combined facility with a bit of a health facility and a community centre and a library and some sporting things all mushed into the one. And now I see we have refined it back and lost a lot of those other components. And I'm just concerned as we go forward at the cost. We're talking $16 to $19 million for option 2, which will be $20 million. And then I look over the page and I look at the reserve as well, which in the initial concept plan was all part of the one deal. And there's another $9 million there. That talks $30 million for a community of 2,500 people. So I'm going to be very interested to see how the public come back at this. I am very concerned at the fact that we've already spent a lot of money buying land and buying liability as far as a HAS site goes, and I don't see where does that come out of our $9.919 million budget, or is that added on the top? So we get even more expensive. So I do believe it needs to go to the community, but I perhaps the increase in project costs needs to be brought forward as an explanation when we look at the last document that's sitting at $10 million and now we're basically sitting at 30. So that's my concern.
Phil.
Thanks, Malcolm. That's most of what I was going to say. Option 2 has got the bracketed our preferred option there. Just for my own education, what's things are taken into consideration with staff when it's a preferred option?
So just, I guess, starting with Councillor Lyle's concern, the decision made by council is the square meterage of a facility that the work has been focused on. So I understand you were thinking a lot more was going to be achieved with that meterage, but we haven't changed the meterage. I guess from a staff point of view, we are mindful of the current environment and the costs that we're facing. We're mindful that there was some science behind the original decision around the meterage size, and so we recognise that there's been a lot of work and investment in terms of the design process that we think would be useful to retain. And so that's the basis on why we think we shouldn't go for a bigger facility given the cost escalations, as Councillor Lyle highlighted, and we have done quite a lot of preliminary work on that original design, that while it does have some escalations, we would otherwise be going back to the drawing board and replicating some costs. And yes, some of the costs associated with land purchases has come out of that amount of money.
Thank you. Well done. Well, not really, just how that, does the preferred option take into account things like the size of the community, as Malcolm was saying?
Yeah.
That it's that the cost expenditure has blown out, and in terms of, you know, the current political environment around everything. I'm just trying to work out why the option is to go ahead as opposed to hold. That's really
okay. So I guess my apologies for not responding directly. The square meterage, there was some science behind that, which was based on the population projections at the time that the original square meterage was determined for option 2. And while there's another option on the table with the same square meterage, it doesn't have some of that design work and that's already been invested in it. The option 1 is on the table. Yeah. And my understanding is that option 2, when we were looking at it, we did compare it with other like facilities in the current environment and other council areas, as including Christchurch City, and we were confident that it wasn't an over bloated design component. It sat middle to low in terms of comparisons with other like facilities, and option 1 would only be a temporary option because we're having to tidy up something that's got some, I guess, functional challenges anyway, and some of the work that would be required will only last for a medium amount of time. So
when the document goes out, does it go out with our preferred options on there in brackets?
We have to show a preferred option. Because the rates examples include the preferred option being
Is part of our scope today deciding what is our preferred option, or next week?
So remember, councillors, we had a workshop and we did a full presentation. What you've got here is what you gave us guidance to bring through. So we're not here to relitigate in terms of the workshop. What is here is what the guidance we were asked to bring through with some of the dollars attached.
Right, Sharon, I understand it, but what is that on the original document didn't have in brackets our preferred option?
Yeah, I guess
even if it did, we were going to give. It was our. I got the impression that there was this table's desire to give the community the ability, the option of doing nothing.
Should be there.
Yes, yeah. So generally,
yes, but why is that not our preferred option?
Well, you can change your mind as to what the preferred option. The staff are making a recommendation that option 2 is be preferred. Councillors can make a decision and say, actually, no, of the 4 options we asked you to bring forward, actually our preferred option is option 1. So we're fine with that. We just need your guidance on that.
I guess that's what I'm saying. My preferred option would be option 1.
Kia ora team, thank you. So just a couple of hopes that in the document. So on the right hand side, we've just got rates and development contributions. On most of the other paperwork, it's given us a wee bit of a division. So hopefully there would be that division available for the document that goes out to consultation. Cool. And also in the wee preamble at the top there. So there's a wee bit of an assumption that everyone knows what the Ellesmere network is. And it would be kind of nice to explain what that is, particularly given that there is some debate with this particular facility about whether a big community space is required, you know, explaining exactly what there is else around there. Thanks.
Just in terms of the first query, we can put additional information in terms of that far right column, which is what you were asking. And what I didn't quite get the option 3 comparison, I think.
It wasn't so much trying to compare the option, it was more that the introduction says there's an Ellesmere network, but without actually describing what that means.
It's a good point. So certainly the content that sits behind that in the report should highlight what facilities are in the network, such as we've given you previously in another report. So
Alternatively, but what is it that the community will see in this document? Because they're not going to. Oh, sorry.
What is it that the community's like? Are they likely to see any of that in this document when it goes out to them?
this is the highlights that you are looking at, and there will be a more comprehensive document that sits behind that goes out for based on your feedback. That's a good prompt to remind us to provide greater level of detail and information about the network and what's in the network that relates to Ellesmere. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie, for asking for the split with the rates and the DCs. I noticed that it's been done for or calculated for Darfield, but reading this document as it is and without knowing, the question I've got is, have development contributions actually been collected for this project? And if they are, what are they? Because that split actually impacts on how much this project is going to cost for our ratepayers going forward. And there will be different costs for different projects because we can't afford this. So we also have to take out a loan. And just remember that when we take out a loan, it's the general rate component that pay for that loan at the very beginning of the process. And hopefully, as we collect the DCs, we're able to tag on construction costs plus the loan costs with regards to the 10-year plan, and alter them as they go along. So we're not piling all the costs onto the ratepayer over the next 10 years to pay off the loan as well. So it's got to be proportional.
So just to have, like there was, as Shona said, there was a big workshop on this particular item at the end of the last year when all of these individual bits were there. So today's focus needs to be on, is this the right level of consultation? Are the 4 options that are here the right options for consultation? And is there any other tweaks that you want to make to it? Whether we like what the outcome is going to be or not like, we're going to get to at the end once we've listened to the community feedback on all of this too. But at the moment, we're trying to develop a draft consultation document, and so that's the feedback and the discussion that we need to focus on here. I wasn't at the workshop at the end of last year, but it's been said to us a number of times that the DCs for any project can only be collected if it's in our long-term plan. Exactly. So we don't collect DCs for anything that's not in our long-term plan ahead of hoping that one day it might be. And this particular project is a replacement for an existing facility, and so it's not a brand new facility based on growth, and as its main driver. So the DC funding part of this is lower than it might be for a brand new facility because a community doubles in size, and so we need a brand new facility that's driven by growth. That wasn't the driver behind this particular one. Mark, if you've got some other things to the detail that Deborah's asked, would be helpful too.
Yeah, sure. So with this particular project, it's one of the ones that we've added in for the new community infrastructure development contribution. But as Sam has just pointed out, it's actually only a small portion of it because the large part of the project is actually renewal of the existing library. So it's about 19, I think we calculate out to 19.5% would be DC funded for the growth portion.
For the next 10 years.
That's over a 20-year period.
Over a 20-year
period.
Yeah, the
capacity for 20 years for some of these bigger projects. Yep.
Okay, so have we been collecting when it first came on the books in 2021? Have we been collecting DCs since then for this project?
We collected DCs for Leaston Park development and but not specifically for this project at that point.
Okay, so we've got DCs for the next part of it, but not this part. So this is basically rate funded. Rate funded.
It'll be 19.5% will be DC funded from the new community infrastructure development contribution, should that be approved through the LTP process.
No, thanks for that. And I agree that thanks, because that information when we were at least putting this together was not available at the time. And it's fair to say that we put all the options forward, and one of the options, as Phil said, was do nothing with regards to the cost structure as a preferred option. So that leaves it in our ball game. But it's important that when you make decisions to go out to the community, you have all the available information so they actually know the percentage cost structures.
Hi. The current library will only be consented for option 1 until 2035. Just is that because of the building code standards are changing in 2035, or yeah, just wanted to clarify that. Do we have a plan for the existing current library in Leeston? Will it be part of the council's role to address that in this proposal here, so that we don't just have a derelict building as we enter the main street? I take it these are not targeted rates, but district-wide increase on the rate amount here. Option 1, I've put it's limited here, as in the sense that it's just sort of repairs to the building. We don't have an option, and that was potentially in the last one, but it got taken out, which is unfortunate because that may come back from the community. The community are meeting on the 8th of February, probably a mixed bag about what the community want. I feel it's a wee bit of the cart being put before the horse here, because I think the community are going to come and express quite a lot of detail about what they're proposing that they want.
Elizabeth, sorry, just on, so all the feedback from the community that we will receive is based on the options that we put out. So today is trying to construct, are these the right options for the community? Are we happy that this be what they discuss? And through the long-term plan, we'll get all that feedback. So if you could focus on what these 4 options look like and whether they meet your expectations around the types of things you'd like community feedback on.
I just felt that the options that we had at the last meeting at the end of last year were more detailed, and it was a shame that we've narrowed it down to 4. But that is what it is.
But that was a decision that was made in guidance given at a whole of council workshop.
And I know, and I did propose at the time that it was left on the table.
But Elizabeth, the point of the consultation document is to allow the community to have their say, and if they come up with an entirely different option that they wish to present to councillors and councillors wish to consider, that is the whole point of the submissions and the hearings. And that's kind of not necessarily for relitigation here.
Got you. So option 4, it doesn't state on there that it's not called Whatarau. Will it be renamed something else, or will that building also be designated Whatarau in option 4?
So that's not what's up for discussion or the point at the moment. The point, what we're asking is, these are the options that it was suggested we bring forward. So we've brought the options forward. What we're asking councillors is which is your preferred option? Council staff have made a recommendation that option 2 is the preferred option. Councillors, what we're really seeking for some guidance today is do you have a preferred option, different option to option 2? Just because we go out with a preferred option, that doesn't mean to say that that is what's going to get endorsed by the community, and that doesn't mean to say that that's what's going to get endorsed at the end. This is about having a starting point to go out to consultation with.
Right. Okay, I don't have a preferred option. I'm waiting for my community to make a bit more of a clarification.
Thanks. I actually think you've done quite well to break this down into just 4 options from the 7 that we originally gave you. So yeah, I think the 7 was too hard. And I guess it would be really nice if we can see that breakdown of rates and DC in the side there. I think it would give the community a good understanding of where things are. And just when we talk about preferred option, I note that we don't have a preferred option on the public transport. So do we have to have it on here? And I guess when there's differing views around the table, do we remove the preferred option? Do we have to have that?
We do. We have a preferred option in order to set the budgets. We do have a preferred option in every big decision in order to set a budget.
Okay.
So that's where that comes from. That is what is anchored to it. You can have other things, but there will be a different budget or cost associated with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. Grant?
First thing I want to do is just check the numbers. $2.22 for 3 million sounds pretty good to me. If you extrapolate it out, it's $14 for 19 million. Is that number right? Look at option one, it says $2.22 for 3 million. If you use the same comparative number, it's $14 for 19 million, which.
Yeah.
We may have to come back to you on that one, double check.
Hopefully the 3 million's right. It makes a big difference. Anyway, so just to be transparent, the community's asked me to independently chair that meeting on the 8th of February. And the initial feedback I've had from the organising group is a sort of a emerging view that they thought they were getting something similar to Dunsandel or Taitapu rather than what's been designed. Does their view get captured into one of these four here? I'm trying to work out whether it's captured by 3 or 4. The question I'm asking probably says option 3, build a new whakarau facility next to Leeston Park, including some additional space. Are we tied to the whakarau design? Because that's the sticking point. Does whakarau just mean the project, or does it mean the triangular design that is associated with it? Because in the community's view, whakarau is a generic name for their project and the design is flexible. So if you could answer that question.
I just would reiterate the comment that Sharon made earlier, which is that the long-term plan consultation process is the opportunity for the community to give feedback, which might provide some recommendations associated with a bigger floor print, and it might make some recommendations that are associated with the design or what it needs to look like that can be considered. That's the process.
No, Denise, what Grant I think is asking is option 3, is that the design that we've got in option 2 made with extra bits around it, or?
As it stands, yes.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
So all I'm giving you is the community feedback initially, and as you say, there's been wider community feedback, and that's possibly one of the likely submission points. So, I mean, within the 4 that are there, the community should be able to accommodate it, in my view. Just it is the rating impacts that I'd like to understand whether that number's correct or not. And I suppose just for reference, doing nothing costs 3 million alone. And I don't know how we build into the conversation the Friends of the Ellesmere Hospital feasibility study, which is actually integral to this process as well, because if this goes ahead or doesn't go ahead, it affects what they might present to the council as well. So how do you suggest, do we introduce that now or later, or when how does that work?
My understanding is that it's a separate feasibility study that is expected to come back. It's logical for it to come back and considered in the submissions and hearings. With regards to this, I'm assuming that there will be some connectivity from whatever community feed comes back, along with the Ellesmere Friends.
Because they'd probably need to put 2 submissions in. One is if this goes ahead, and if it doesn't go ahead, this is the secondary submission. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Megan.
Kia ora. My comment isn't specific to whakarau, but I'm using that as an example. My comments, I could have made this comment on any of the big decisions, but coming into this role, what I had to do for myself to really make sure that I knew how to make a good decision on the long-term plan was to create like a cheat sheet of what the existing long-term plan is. What is it that Selwyn has a role and function and responsibilities to do? And then to know the line between a district council and regional council. I did a cheat sheet for ECAN as well to go, what are they paying for? And summarise both down into 2 pages so that I could get a really good understanding of the decisions to be made. And then it made me think, if I'm doing that at my age only now because I'm a decision maker, then maybe our community members don't know all of the great stuff that council's currently delivering. And I look back into the consultation document last time, and I know there's a really fine line on what you give out to the community when you consult. But if I was just going to receive a consultation document that talked about primarily big ticket item leased in $25 million, I'd also like that balance with knowing that in my community where I live, I have all this other really cool stuff, and that council's already delivering lots of just business as usual services for their community. And so off the back of Sophie's comment where she says, probably we need to explain the Ellesmere network, I just wanted to just give a comment that there's also the wider context, because quite often if your lens is local government, you know it. If your lens is central government, you know it. If it's working at a fish and chip shop, you know it. But often we don't know the level of detail about services that the council offer. So that was my comment. I was using whātaro as the example to say, some members of the community might not quite get it. Kia ora.
That's a really good point, Megan, and that suggests behind this is a summary document. Behind it sits a lot more in depth, but I hear, as I understand, I hear what you're saying. Tell the story of what other facilities council has, and in those not just the area of Ellesmere, but also across Selwyn, so that it provides some perspective for which the residents can understand. So your point is noted, and that will be taken into account.
Great. And we need to decide what our preferred option is, or give some guidance to staff around where those budgets currently sit, because as it stands, the preferred option is funded and what the budgets are that have been brought forward. There's option 2 has come out of the discussions that have been had to date, and is the recommendations of staff. I'm hearing that there's a mixed view in the room as to whether it should be option 1 or option 2. I haven't heard, I mean, Grant, you mentioned maybe there's a 3 or 4 option that might come through from the community later, but as far as where we sit at the moment, I think my preference would be that we do something for Leeston. I think Leeston is a community hub for the wider Ellesmere area and needs to have a community facility in that space. There was a decision made by this council when we built Lakeside that kind of delayed any delivery of a Leeston facility, because Lakeside was built at that time. But we need to have Leeston with good facilities. By having an option that has built something with a dollar figure beside it, gives us the flexibility to be able to change what that option looks like should there be feedback through this process that actually the current design isn't going to be the one that gets built, and option 4 is, or option 3 could be. If we move to option 1 as our preferred option, that means we do not put any of the dollars that are going to be required for any work into this budget, and so any change is going to be an increase in the rates that we consult on. So there's a couple of reasons here why I think leaving an option 2 as our preferred option gives us at this stage the flexibility to move without affecting the overall rates change for the community. Deborah?
Reading it with the next big decision, which is 3B, you're going with a preferred option of 19 million. Then you're going through to a preferred option of 9.5 million. We're sitting on a $30 million maximum project for this community as preferred options. And that's the maximum that you've calculated that is going to have the impact on rates jointly. And I think it's important that you do understand that we're going out to consultation on basically, by the time inflation hits again, if we stall it any further, it'll be more. Construction costs are going up all the time, so they're not going to stay static, but we are looking at a $30 million project over 15 years if you're looking at the landscaping. Just as a comparison, is this going to start to be the norm for a population of, say, 5,000 people in Selwyn within the communities of what our facilities are going to cost and how we're going to go forward strategically with other builds that have been sitting on the books?
So Deborah, are you an option 1 or an option 2 as a preferred option? What?
I'm going to be, for consultation, the maximum, because I think people need to understand what the maximum impact this is going to have on their rating ability and their rates to pay at the end of the day. And I think we should be always choosing the maximum, knowing we can always calculate down when the pressure hits, but you can't calculate up.
And so as an example of that, if we put option one and if those numbers are correct, we've put option one in our consultation document, and then through submissions, we get overwhelming submissions around building something, option 2, 3 or 4. And then council decides to build option 2, 3 or 4, then there's a $55 surprise in everyone's rates impact because we didn't tell them about that when we went out for consultation. So yeah, so that's why I think staff too have put in these preferred options, because then it allows the community to understand the impact and the dollar changes within it. So you'll see that right through with the preferred options. Phil.
Yeah, no, that really clarifies things. I appreciate what you just said. I guess it's my naivety in terms of the process, but we're talking about all these things in isolation, whereas relative is our community is going to look at them as a whole. And I wonder whether we should be making all our preferred option decisions as a whole too. Like, I mean, 20 million here, 9 million on the next one, 15 million on the one after that, 130 million on the one after
The slide that we're actually going to get to shortly after this is about what this does to the whole rates. So that's why we want some guidance on the big decisions, and then we're going to skip a few slides to actually get to the whole, so you see the whole.
I guess a population of 2,400 people and an expenditure of $30 million. I just wonder whether that's us being fiscally responsible. That's all.
Thanks. And I think that probably speaks to our language that we need to use through the consultation document, because like with the facilities that we build, we talk about a network of facilities, and we're trying to move away from a township feeling like this is my thing that I pay for and have complete ownership on. These facilities are all here for all of Selwyn to be able to use, which is why we've got a district-wide targeted rate, so everybody has ownership of the facilities in each of the towns. Thank you for the conversation and guidance on that. We'll move on to decision 3B. Which is the reserve. Chuck it up on screen. There we go. So we've got 3 options here. Do the 3 options cover the types of discussions that we think the community needs to understand about, and provide us feedback on what their preferred outcome would be?
I'm trying to read 18, 8, and it's on the interaction. The next thing has been strategically worked out and added up together.
Yep, well, it's 18 and then you add another 8 to the 18 and then you add another 6 to the 18, 8.
$55.
Over 15 years, yep.
Okay, fine. On top of the 50.
Deborah, if you're going to tuck on your microphone, if you're going to talk to us.
So I was just, can we go back a slide? Sorry. Can we go back? Just,
I think the point being, Deborah, is that the reasons why there's options there. So even let's say option 2 went 3B, community might decide actually they only want option 1 on the next slide. So that will alter. So the risk is of going out with a wrapped up dollar figure. We don't want to do that. That's why they're distinctly there as 3A and 3B. So it's almost a option of mix match or do nothing.
Chuck back to the next slide, Jen. These seem like the right options to begin out with. It covers the breadth from do nothing right through to do a preferred option, which includes money that people can then make their decision on and provide their feedback on. Great. Next option, big decision 4. Duffield Recreation and Sports Facility. We've got option 1, 2 and 3 there, again giving the full breadth of all the options that will be provided for the community, from no rating impacts and do nothing through to the rating impacts of building the preferred option. Is there any discussion on a different option or other things that aren't considered there? Good. That brings us to the end of the next.
Hang on.
Sorry, Grant.
Well, Bob might have put his hand up. I
haven't seen anyone. Sorry.
What happened? You know, originally it was a swimming pool. Now it's 2 indoor courts. It's just
business case.
You know, the last LTP we had a swimming pool coming at the end of the LTP, and now this is morphed into this.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking about a community of about 2,000 people, which I haven't seen the GLG needs assessment, which I thought as councillors we might have seen. So I'm sort of struggling with this one a bit because it seems to have come from left field really, and it doesn't seem. I know James, you just dropped a bit of information on us there that's come to hand, but it's one of those things as a governor you're going, well, where did this come from?
I'm just going to just go back over why this is here then, because there's confusion about this particular project. We've already been through a council meeting which said we would consult on it here, so that's probably the driving factor. But the change between the pool and moving to this point, and if we could just data being correct is important, and both Leeston and Darfield don't have 2,000 people living in them. So we just need to think about our population, our use of language around population. And I'll just mention the last project is called Whataurau, not Whatarau. So if we can just think about our own language when we, as the owners of that current project and where it sits, can continue to use Whatarau, which does require sometimes some thought rather than seeing AU as Rau at the end, please. Whatarau. James?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sam. So Grant, to answer your question, we did present the GLG report to council in a briefing, and I went through the future of Melbourne facilities in that briefing, which included swimming pool facilities. So to talk at a high level about how the needs analysis is kind of worked out for indoor courts and aquatic facilities, we take a population-based approach. So the population catchment in the Melbourne area around Darfield, that's described as a 15 to 20 minute drive time around Darfield, is over 8,000 people at the moment. The sort of court ratios we're working at in terms of population are 1 court per 7,800 people. It would be fair to say that in Selwyn, that's probably still a conservative number because the community is extremely active and generally younger. And we're seeing massive increases in sport participation, especially in basketball, and netball's a little bit more static, but particularly in basketball, that's up 33% in the last 12 months alone. So we are getting quite a lot of pressure from that space. The reason we started that work was actually because of the aquatic facility being in the LTP last time. I wanted some real data to understand when and where this facility could happen. But as Sharon's mentioned before, we wanted to take a place-based approach to all these facilities, not come to you and say, actually, everything's going to be jammed in all at the same time, and because the needs come online at different times. So the aquatic centre discussion is still a live one for the Melbourne area. It's out, like I said before, though, it's outside this LTP in terms of time pressure. It's more like year 12. We feel that the existing facility with upgrades can hold longer hours, potentially a longer season if we need to prolong that period.
The 8,000, does that include West Melton, does it?
No.
8,000?
No, it doesn't include West Melton. Sorry, just to add to that, the growth moving into that, the conservative growth figure was over 12,000 in the 20-year period, but moving up to about 15,000 in that catchment. So that's where the second court comes online.
Thanks, James. Bob?
Yeah, I thought that the pool was already in the long-term plan for about year 8 of it or something. And then, as I say, this has come along and dropped in ahead of it. And so where does the pool stand now? Is it still in year 8, like we said in the last long-term annual plan?
No. During the last long-term plan, there was a decision made by councillors to put in $5 million in year 8 of the LTP, based on some needs assessment being done. Hence why I've done the work and we've done the work on a needs assessment to inform that decision. It would be really safe to say that $5 million isn't going to get us anywhere close to an indoor facility of the scale that's going to be required in the Melbourne area down the track. So that's why we've done the work, and that's why I'm suggesting we take the following course of action. What this does do, though, is provide you with some ability to make a decision about, as we track forward, about location, potential co-location of sport and indoor court facilities. So having the ability to hub those up down the track, which will provide some operational efficiencies as we move forward.
Yeah, it's just that the community understood from our last long-term plan that was when it was going to be looked at. And now it's just not happening. And there's no discussion in here about the pool, in my opinion. Like, as I say, I think people have been let down. That the people I'm speaking to would rather have a pool than 2 courts, because they believe the pool would be used a lot more by a more mix of people. So as I say, and being in there, I expected, and I've been saying to people, this is what we're doing, but now we're not, and it's quite upsetting, really.
And so that's why we're doing this consultation, to hear from the community, but to share, because James has done the needs assessment work to understand where the demand sits, and that's where that changes. So this now provides us with that opportunity to have that level of conversation, Bob, with the changes.
Yeah, but the thing is that the pool isn't actually in here.
No.
And that's disappointing to me.
Okay. Thank you. Sophie.
Yeah, I guess it's another of those ones where you wonder whether we're telling the story, in the sense that, like, I look at this and think this is, it's got the background information that's planning for the population that's coming. We made a decision last time round. We did the wastewater reticulation. That is going to lead to increased population. We know that people enjoy living in places like Darfield, and it's got a wider catchment. Hey, I was at Darfield Pool the other day with my kids. And I live in Rolleston. Like, I can cycle to the other pool, but I still go to Darfield sometimes. Team sports, it's district-wide stuff. So it makes sense. By the time this sort of project would be built, it will be needed, and there's no point in building it late. So it's just another of those suggestions that the background information and the context around why this is needed, that may well include a pool, depending on what everybody says. Back to us, the more we can make easily accessible would be great, because we know the information's out there, and there are going to be some people who like to read everything and get the whys. Hopefully, rather than just reacting and going, oh my God, not another 20 bucks on my rates. Yeah, we just need more of the whys. Thank you.
Thank you. Noted.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of hard when you look at, like, we look at the pool and the current use, and you've done an amazing job leveling up current pool site, but now everybody wants to use it all the time. And, like, from what I hear from the community is that it is at full capacity, and I have concerns about it being at full capacity now, and then especially if we're looking at closure of Sheffield Pool, how well are we to balance that? So, where do these things sit? And so I guess, is it worth mentioning that there could be the inclusion of a pool in year 12 for the community to understand that it may be somewhere, because if we're not communicating anything about it, then they're going to be going, well, actually, we might not want this. And, we would be happy to swap it. And yeah, thanks for putting the DCs in there. And I guess, yeah, we can collect quite a bit with the development that's going to happen in our area. And I know that there is support for this for all year round use, because a lot of our sport out there is hampered by seasonal availability. So I think it'll be interesting to see what the community comes back with.
And Lydia, you've raised a good point, and it's about where we talk about particular things within the document. And so the Sheffield Pool was raised earlier as one of those other matters, and whether or not we talk about aquatics together there, and that doesn't then cloud this particular discussion, which is on a particular project at the moment. And when we talk when we talk Sheffield Pool, then we can talk about Melbourne Aquatics and possible co-location. Like, it's a different than actually delivering this one project.
Yeah, so there's some commentary we can put in the infrastructure strategy, or referring to the infrastructure strategy that sits alongside the LTP, that would reference the fact that in year 12 we're looking at investment into a year-round facility in Melbourne for aquatics. So that's something I think has already been planned for and will be included.
Thank you. It's good to have that discussion. There's one piece on there, James, that says council-owned site. And that could mean that we purchase a site, could mean that we currently own a site, but to me that excludes working with the Ministry of Education, who have shown some interest in wanting to have this discussion. Has that already been crossed off, or should we just leave that open for the conversation, and then following this we make the decision actually when we're in decision-making mode at the end of this process rather than upfront here?
Yeah, look, totally up for your guidance there. I think we've budgeted for some additional purchase of land in some of that project cost if required, as well as the development of that land. So it won't have any impact on budget to include that. There will be limitations around potential MOE site in terms of co-location and things like that, though. So just something to be aware of.
Deborah?
Wow. So here we are, trying to cost a program or a project. It says, I was under the impression that we owned the land, therefore land costs on a reserve were not going to be calculated in this budget. Now we hear that there is a possibility of us having to purchase some land. That cost needs to be built in to the cost structure of this at the maximum. So we're going out with true cost to the community.
It is.
It is. So this $11 million project is going to include at the maximum, right, land that is purchased also. So
That's
it's
correct.
currently not at a reserve. Well, that's not what it says when this is the new information that you are now explaining to me. That is not what I'm reading in the document in front of me. And that's why it's important that we actually be very clear on the cost structure of what we are committing ourselves and understanding to.
I think just to clarify that we're in the position where we want to give you that, not worst case scenario, but the total cost, what it could possibly be under any scenario, including contamination that we find, anything like that. So there's contingency built into the project. So we can come back with some better news, hopefully not worse news, to avoid a whakatau situation in the future.
And that reflects what we've asked staff to do. So as councillors have said, make sure your project costs include all possible outcomes so that we don't end up, as you've just said, with land contamination, which has happened on a number of projects, and blowing out the budget. So James, and the response here from staff has been to give us those numbers here, Deborah. That shouldn't be a surprise. That's what we've asked for.
When I look at the project cost, including the land costs, etc., at 11.28 million of what's being looked at, and I can look at other facilities and compare the blowout in prices that we've actually built in our district in the eastern Selwyn areas, this is a really, really cheap project with regards to its costing. My comment.
Cool. James has taken that on board, yeah. Thank you. That's a big decision 4. The next items will just cover off the 3 that were raised this morning, and then we'll talk to the overall rating impact and some rating examples to work through. So Jen, the next one after this was the Sheffield Community Pool. Great. So this is really, there's some information here that we're sharing. We're not providing the 3 or 4 options around what the outcome is. There's a lot more certainty here that we're providing for the community around the current direction.
And again, that came through from the workshop briefing that we had. So we've just brought that through as we were asked. So with the understanding of going out to the community, and I'm fairly certain that we'll get some community feedback through the submissions related to that. I think we could move on to the next one, which is what Denise covered off before. And apologies, Denise has had to go to a meeting actually on my behalf because we're running over time. So and this is around that investment into economic development and the investment over a 10-year period. And this is about us balancing doing what we've said we would do in terms of facilities and service, etc., with the need to also continue to grow and add value. And of course, utilising the Infometrics data that we've got available, the importance of giving some demonstrable figures about what can be achieved in terms of dollar-wise through gross domestic product information for new FTE created within the district.
Grant.
Is this a question you're asking the community to say, yes, go ahead and do it, or no, we're just telling them this is what we're doing? Is this just community guidance? I just want to be clear what we're...
Yeah, it's basically saying that we want to do economic development. We want to invest some funding, and basically the guidance from the community could still be that they could come back and say, no, absolutely, council, we don't want you to focus in that area.
Have we got some evidence to prove that when councils do economic development strategies that provides value? Like, are we going to provide some sort of evidence with it, or this is it that we?
So there's this is the benefit behind the economic development strategy and the workshops and the HOEs that we have held to date. So we can take some information out of that and add that in as additional narrative.
Grant, what I'm hearing you ask is, so we're going to put an 8, what's the return to our district for us putting an 8?
Well, I guess being brutal, how many businesses set up in Selwyn because Selwyn's got an economic development strategy? Is it core to their business decision making that we've got an economic development strategy and we're implementing it? Is it a driver that actually drives the outcomes, or does it make us feel good? I mean, does it actually deliver value?
So what Denise talked about was intentional. So in terms of development that has occurred around Selwyn has happened unintentionally, but we're reaching a point where that unintentional development or that creativity is going to stop. And this is about taking ownership of wanting to assist businesses and attract new businesses.
I mean, I'm all for enabling, absolutely. What's the greatest contributor to GDP in Selwyn? I would say ag. Does ag fit into this as well?
Yep. So that it covers agriculture, it covers tertiary, it covers dairy, it covers basically everything. It's around having those funds and opportunities to continue that growth and development. And in some respects, where it will partly fit into too is the investment and disinvestment strategy. So at the moment, we don't have the ability to leverage, and without naming names, we had an opportunity perhaps that came earlier in my tenure here, where if we'd had some economic stimulus fund available, we might have been able to come out with a different outcome that may have led on to some greater community benefits. So it's a mixture of all of that.
The only challenge I'd put back, I wonder how measurable the outcome of that's going to be. But I suppose after 1 or 2 years, you could have a review of the project.
Yep, and as Denise said, we're very clear about wanting to have some specific outcomes to be measured, and she talked about, we get reports from Infometrics, so we can measure using their data. We can measure about FTE growth within the district. And again, harking back to what we've heard through the pre-engagement surveys, that our community actually want the ability to be able to work here and not necessarily just live here and have to travel into Christchurch. So it is, what are those opportunities with the businesses that are already existing, or how we attract new?
One of the things that's come up is around the value, and I think the digital one had a number each year. This is an 8.2 million as a one-off.
Yeah.
Should we try and be consistent with the way that we're describing the numbers to people? And that may or may not be good. I'm just questioning, this just looks different. And also be quite explicit that the economic development strategy is going to determine the spend of this. So this isn't to build the strategy. Actually, we want a strategy that this then enables, and there'll be other industries, and thinking particularly aerospace, that's growing at the moment, and the opportunities for new things in Selwyn that aren't currently here, for us to drive this to be the centre of gravity for those types of things.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful guidance. And yes, we can expand on the narrative, and it is over 10 million. 8.2 over 10 years, but you're right, we haven't been explicit enough in what falls in which year, and we'll amend that.
Cool, thank you. Any other comments on this? The next one, Jen. Enhancing customer experience through digital. This does have the explanation of how the funding fits.
Yeah, and again, it is about laying the foundations and pathway, because we know at the next, either at an annual plan or a long-term plan, we're going to bring a larger request through with a digital roadmap. So it's about explaining right up front now as a point of reference to our community that we're recommending that we need to make an investment in our digital activities.
Yeah, my only query on this one is that it feels like the title's missing a word at the end. Digital is like, it's an adjective.
Noted. Thank you, Sophie. We'll add on a word.
Any other comments on this digital piece? No, the last couple of slides you skipped through at the very beginning, Jen, had keeping their community informed, which we didn't go into in detail. No, I'm just going to highlight that included Rolleston access, Lincoln Town Centre upgrade, roading renewals and maintenance, centralised low nitrate water sources, community infrastructure development contribution, HQ developments, compulsory organics, and potential legislative change in fluoridation.
One more.
There's one over the
strengthen partnerships with mana whenua, investment and divestment strategy, exploring the district public transport services and walking and cycling improvements. So those are also matters that the community will know about, and we want to hear their feedback on. The detail that's there in front of you gives a high level of what those projects look like. The intention wasn't to go through each of them line by line here, but treat them a little bit like we did before. They're in there, they're budgeted, and the community give us their feedback on whether or not they think that they are at the level of importance that we have placed them at. We'd like to be able to move to talking about the rating impact and the overall control. Deborah?
Thank you. I think it's very important, and it's mentioned at the beginning, we have some projects that have been sitting on our books for probably, 15 years, keep being pushed out in community facility space. We mentioned that for the next 3 years, we're going to do some further investigation. I'd just like to understand on the timeline after the 3 years where those facilities have been fitted into, because in some cases we've been collecting DCs for these projects and we haven't even started them. And I think it's important that we keep our community informed with regards to where we're at with these projects, because we could be legally challenged on them and from a legislative point of view. And I'm starting to get really, really concerned about how projects seem to jump in here and jump in there without a business case, etc. And others in the community, we don't seem to be progressive enough to actually, fit them and make them work. And as council members change, everybody has their pet projects that suddenly jump in and trump these ones. And I think it's important that, like the Lincoln Town Centre upgrades, we actually put those long-term community facility ones in here that we know that we've been collecting DCs for, and be transparent with our ratepayers out there and the developers out there that we have a purpose for collecting the DCs for these projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. That's a good question. So I think the purpose is that over the next 3 years, staff will go away and develop the case studies, business cases for these projects. And then the next LTP, they will be programmed into those years for further consultation. So the first 3 years is to do the groundwork, make sure we actually need them, the size, capacity, all those sort of considerations, and then move into the next LTP to prioritise the timing of them.
Okay.
Thank you. Grant?
Just the way you're explaining it there, is this a sort of headline? Just thinking about the Lincoln Town Centre upgrade, there's a lot of new councillors around this table I don't think would know what that money buys, and I'm sure our ratepayers don't. And so maybe some explanation about what 46 million is going to do for you, what it actually is. Because I've asked you, Phil, what's the Lincoln Town Centre master plan going to look like? And you may know, but I'm suggesting you may not. And if the councillors don't know, I'm sure the general public doesn't know. That's even I'm having a problem. It was so long ago.
2006.
I'm not sure what that money's going to deliver now and what its time frame.
Andrew, is there going to be more information in the document when it goes out? Is there a half page? Is it a paragraph? What's expected to inform the community?
At the moment, basically the Lincoln Town Centre project has just been split up into essentially all the individual projects which make up that figure. So in the current LTP and even in the previous LTP before that, we had funding in there for the upgrade essentially of Gerald Street from one end to the other. That originated from the 2016 Lincoln Town plan that was adopted by council. And so basically we've again issues with cost escalations, inflation and things like that have had to go back and readjust the existing budgets to accommodate the projected costs now on that basis. But essentially it's a transformational project for Gerald Street in regards to an outcome to provide cycle lanes from one end to the other. Around the existing town centre, it's to provide a higher amenity, slow speed
Sorry,
environment.
I'm just going to stop you. We don't need to explain that today. It would be good to have that though, as Grant said, so for councillors, but what's going to be in the document for people to be able to understand what the number means?
Well, if you're asking, we can provide some direction on that. That's fine. We can include that. We just wanted to highlight the fact that we've got a potential increase in cost, and you are correct. It's probably wise to provide some explanation around that. Yeah, cool. So we can include that.
Thank you. Great. Thanks, Grant. Lydia. Sorry, you had more?
HQ improvements, there's some ability to move that around to make that more efficient. That's a discussion we could have another day.
Sure.
Headquarter improvements, did you say?
Well, you've got, a new pod at Royalton HQ. So that budget, rather than building another building, could be reallocated to other accommodation options.
Yeah, potentially. And again, that's about the growth in FTE and now exceeding the size of the building.
Rather than hold the meeting up, I'll have a chat to you after about that.
Smashing.
There was a plan for that already.
Lydia.
Yeah, so Grant just touched on one of the questions I had, which was around the HQ improvements. And so I wasn't too sure where that had come from, or if that had been decided before my time.
The answer was there was an intention to the pod which the Mayor and I are currently in, that was supposed to have been a full pod, and there was budget made available to actually extend that out to the full pod.
Okay. And I was just wondering why we've got the potential legislative change in fluoridation included there. And like I talked about it last time, is there actually any point in including that when it's not a requirement and we've not budgeted it?
So in terms of what we're not, sometimes we take as much responsibility for telling the community why we're not doing something. And this is where the fluoridation is put into here, and it is more for information. And there will obviously be a bit more narrative. We're just giving you the high level narrative here. And that's why we've also included the nitrates as well. Because we know that there are pockets of our community who have interest in the fluoridation and nitrates, and we're almost explaining why we're not progressing those things, but making sure the community understand that we have not lost sight of them.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's some discussion around the fluoridation piece, at least saying we're not doing it because we haven't been told and we haven't funded it, but that does mean if we do get told, it's unfunded. And at that point, there will be an impact which hasn't been accounted for in this current rating piece. So it's about, again, being just transparency of the message around where we currently sit. Elizabeth.
There's quite a lot of DC, HQ, etc. Abbreviations for things that obviously we're familiar with. Just wanted to know if that's something that we'll make sure we're clear with when it goes into the public. But also there's a lot of people with learning difficulties out there, and they're visual learners. With some of the things that we've talked about, will there be maps and more visual ways for people to see what we're discussing and proposing in the district, so that they can understand a little bit clearer?
Absolutely. Yep. So for the coordination piece, there's a map sort of showing roughly where those schemes are located and the list of them. So there will be some visual aids through that document.
But we're also very cognizant of the look and feel of our consultation documents, and we have a really good digital and marketing team who will very much have that in mind as to making sure all our community can understand.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, thanks for the conversation on those items as well. Jean, if we could move now to the finances and run us through what this looks like for different homes and the overall impact on rates.
$25. Up, up, up. Keep going. Nope, keep going. You want to get to this one.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, everyone. My apologies.
Yeah, that's what I
Yep. Thanks, Jen. So I thought it'd be worthwhile just doing a bit of a recap from the discussion we had in December and the things that we have taken out of these financials. So I won't run down the full list, but nitrates, chlorine, etc., a lot of chemicals that I don't actually understand. But none of those are actually modelled just now. But as Sharon, as many people have alluded to, where I've got those talked to. So these are not part of the financials as they stand just now. The next one, just on the revenue opportunities. So we had the slide before.
Should we just on that, just because that's a change from December, and just so that everyone understands what those changes are, these figures that we've got now no longer sit in the budgets, and this has been savings that staff have made based on the feedback that we're given before Christmas.
Yep.
So the centralised water treatment around nitrates, that was one of those big chunky things that we sort of said, yeah, like there's some appetite for, but actually when you see the numbers and where they sit, the decision was made to not put that fund in now. So that's not included in the work that's going forward. The same with the intermittent chlorine, the Lincoln Event Centre upgrade, the water fluoridation, those numbers have been pulled from this.
And Deborah, I could hear you saying intermittent chlorine. That's right. If you go look at the words that we put into the document, we're saying we haven't included it in the budget. If you want it included here is the cost associated with it. So it's about the community having to make an active decision to want to put the cost on top of.
Explained a little bit clearer when we're actually talking about the chlorine issue and the cost structure.
This table won't be in the consultation document. It won't form part of the long-term plan. This is for today, so that you understand the key changes.
Oh, sorry, I'll wait my turn.
Should we run through the detail? You carry on, Jen. We'll finish the presentation. Sorry, Alison, and then we'll come back to questions.
I was just going to ask the economic development strategy is there, but we literally just talked about it. So it's kind of in, but out also?
No, we've reduced some of the initial costs that have been put in. So again, taking on board the feedback from yourselves prior, it was okay that these are the things that we need to trim back.
So, just move it on to the next slide. I think the key focus here.
Okay,
Jen. Revenue opportunities. So the new opportunities that we've got listed there, I think it's just worth noting, we haven't fleshed out all of the details here. So the revenue, if there is any revenue, which I believe there is not factored into these numbers just now. Sharon, did you want to add anything to that one?
No, I was actually going to say in terms of as we've gone through the long-term plan and working through our looking at the options, we've been very cognizant and we've applied a new lens of actually what are the opportunities that are being missed. We've had a wonderful bottom-up feed from the staff about actually there are opportunities here. What we have not had the opportunity to do is run those opportunities to ground. And that is something we're committed to doing by the time of the next annual plan, because we think we're missing opportunities to generate revenue into the organisation that will ultimately assist in the long term with offsetting some of the rates contributions. It's just that we have not had the capacity to do that in the term of preparing for this LTP. So it's about being really clear that as what we're bringing forward, yes, there is cost associated, but we also see opportunities going into the future, and that is our commitment to whether it's via investment and disinvestment or funding opportunities to also, for future LTPs and annual plans, make sure that we bring innovative and different ways of being able to offset rates costs.
I think it is as well as part of this. The last time when we presented the numbers, we did have a very high number of capital projects that we were planning to deliver. Going back and looking through those, we have moved a lot of these projects out and phased them to the point where we have recognised the affordability and also where we have capacity to deliver as well. And also looking at the carryover projects that have been part of this budget, but we know are going to move into future years. So as it stands just now, we've got 70 million that's illustrated on that slide there, split down between water, transport, facilities and resource. Those will be moved into years 1, 2 and 3 of the LTP. Murray, I'll leave you to, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, perhaps I can talk to the next slide if you like. If you move to the next slide now, Jen. This is more of a illustrative way of showing that information that was just mentioned. So the first 4 years on that graph are ones that have already passed. So that's our history. We obviously had the pandemic through those, but we sort of topped out. So over $100 million worth of projects we're able to deliver. The last of the orange bar lines, and then the one that looks green is sort of is where we're at now. So we've had a bit of a restructure lag, new teams formed, new processes developed, a number of things which we could talk in a huge amount of detail, but we won't right now. And then we move into the LTP proper, so years 1 through to 10. So the blue lines are the new projects that we bring forward, with the idea of having a lower new projects in the first year and then ramping up so that years 2, 3 and 4 are still hitting full capacity, but we want to make sure we can ramp our resources and processes up to meet that demand as we go through. So one of the key purposes of the slide is to say to staff and to councillors, as to council as a whole, let's not try and front load the LTP. Let's make sure we have a balanced process so we can ramp up resources and actually deliver for our communities.
Thanks, Murray. So moving on to the finance rating impact, and Craig is going to talk us through this detail.
And can I ask a question? I've just got to go to a meeting at 2:30. Just one quickly. Happy with what's going ahead here. I suppose the key question I wanted to ask, and I'm not sure it's today or the next one we have, where is the opportunity for the community to consult on painful cuts? So the stuff that you go, oh, geez, you know, we're going to have to pay more on water user rates, or we're going to have a reduction in services, or we're going to sweat the infrastructure assets, or whatever that is, that it's not business as usual type cuts, but are we going to have that opportunity for our community to say, actually, I'm prepared to have my libraries open less or my community centre open less if I can have a lower rate? Are we going to go as far as that, or is that something they'd have to submit individually on and just have a crack at?
Yeah, I would say that if the community come forward and say, in terms of the proposed ratings that we go out with, that there is a vehement opposition that then leads you as governors to say, well, then we have to consider closing things, then you will give us that guidance as to what you wish us to do.
Because it would be easier for us if we had some big ticket items where you go, well, this, you could say 1% on this or 2% on that, particularly choose roading as I think if you go up 20 million, you cut back to 10 instead, and you say, well, we're going to sweat the asset on that. This is some of the big ticket stuff. But
yeah.
Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Back soon, hopefully.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone. So what does this mean for rate movements? That's probably the question you're all asking. So based on the draft numbers that you have before you, the average increase is sitting approximately 16%. Below, this table below just shows some rating examples. There's some residential rating examples, there's one rural up there and a commercial rating example. If you go 5 columns into that table, you'll see the percentage increase and how that varies between residential properties and rural properties. Yeah, should I just skip through all the slides, then we'll come over? Yeah. Next slide, please. So this slide is just giving an overview. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you're very quietly spoken, Craig.
I'll go back. Yeah. Try and get closer. So what this slide shows is an overview of how the general rate works. The general rate requirement is calculated based on net expenditure, and we generally increase the general rate revenue in a number of ways, that through growth in the rating and population base, so that gives us more ratepayers paying the rate. And the second point is annual increases in the rate factor and UAGC, so that's the actual rate that each ratepayer pays. The way that the general rate works is the net expenditure less the general rate income that's collected creates a borrowing requirement. So that's where we're like smoothing the requirement over a period of years. So a lower rate increase, the general rate would mean more borrowing in longer term. Below, the bullet points below are just showing ways that we could reduce borrowing levels. So we could either reduce operational expenditure or capital expenditure, secure additional revenue sources, which were alluded to earlier, or increase the rate higher than what we've proposed. So the current slide we're on is just highlighting the key areas which are driving the increase to the general rate. So in the 2021-31 LTP, we included a 6% increase across the board for the 10 years. That level of increase to the general rate is no longer sufficient, as debt would end up at an unsustainable level. The several factors contributing to this. There are lower dividend revenue streams from our investments in Orion, because we have a lower cash balance that we're holding now. There's lower interest revenue generated on a lower balance. There are higher costs associated with overhead costs, such as insurance premiums. There's also, in our last LTP, we'd assumed a 2.5% interest rate. Now we're looking at sort of 6% interest rate. So in our borrowings, we've got a much higher interest cost that we're carrying. The transportation general rate requirement is much higher than it was in the previous LTP. The community service general rate is also higher, mainly due to the economic growth strategy that we've talked about earlier. And then support costs are higher across the board due to increased staff numbers, and then the cost of living costs associated with recruiting new staff. So what this translates to in terms of the general rate is a 20% increase in year 1, 15 in year 2, and then 10 in year 3, and then 5% going forward after that. So. The slide that's up there at the moment is just to demonstrate the impact of not increasing rates in year 1 as we've proposed. So if we reduce that increase to 18 or 15 or 10% in year 1, what impact that would have on the long-term debt levels. So the purple line, which is the lower line, is a 20% increase in year 1. But if we were to cut back those increases in year 1 to 18, 15 or 10, you'd have a much higher long-term debt balance that you'd be carrying.
Sorry, no,
Yeah, that's good. So the next 2 slides are just showing the movements and the target rates. This first table is showing percentage movements, and then if you can just jump to the next one. The next one just translates those target rate movements into dollar terms per ratepayer. So what I wanted to just demonstrate here is that for every % increase in the general rate, properties throughout the district are impacted disproportionately. High value properties are impacted higher due to the nature of the way the general rate's calculated. That's calculated in 2 ways. There's a capital value based portion of the general rate, and then there's a fixed charge, which we call the Uniform Annual General Charge, the UAGC. So as a point of example there, for a $10 million property, for each percentage increase in the general rate, you're looking at $85 impact to that property. Or if it was a sort of average residential property in the district, $825,000, it would be a $9 impact. So that's just sort of demonstrating that difference in impact between different properties throughout the district. Look at this one, I'll skip. Maybe just skip one. There is, which I'm sure you're aware of, a legislative requirement that there is a 30% cap set that councils must not seek more than 30% of their total rates revenue from rates charged on a uniform basis. So based on our proposed rate increases, we're getting very close to that cap. By year 2028, 29, we've reached that cap, sort of stabilising at the 30%. So within legislative requirement, but very, very close. So in a recent workshop in December, we updated our treasury management policy and increased our debt limit from 160% to 220%. So that's what that blue line is showing there. So that's a percentage of total revenue. The green line, which is sort of tracking downwards, was what we proposed for our net borrowing in our 21-31 LTP. And then the red line's where we're sort of headed based on the current program. So we're still within our debt limit we've set in our treasury policy, but quite a bit higher than our previous long-term plan. Need to pause here. Okay.
Marcus.
Gonna run through the steps. Yeah.
I think this slide is just illustrating our development contribution to income and where it's split across each of the areas. The values and obviously the funding percentages on the other side as well. I don't know if Mark wants to add anything to that, but this is sort of just came out for the last discussion pre-Christmas just to illustrate how this was made up.
Perhaps we just take some questions.
Right, that brings us to the end of all the slides. Cool, thank you. So let's go back to the beginning of that, and if you just check up there probably the rates impact. Yeah, that one, which shows just over an 8% average over the 10 years, but a 16% lift in year one. And then some examples there. I think we talked yesterday that the average house price now is 825. And so on. So we'll probably update these numbers just to show what true averages are today. And obviously there's not many that actually sit at the average, and everyone's kind of above or below or around, but it just gives people an idea of the type of impacts that they can expect to see both with and without sewage, because those are the two clear examples that show quite big dollar differences if you're not paying the sewage rate or wastewater rate. The rural one's slightly different in that it's got water units attached to it. And again, some rural properties do or don't have water units, and some have the 3.5 that's there, and many have 2, and some have 20. So we're not trying to give every example here, but it's just to indicate to the community what some of the possible rating changes might be. Deborah.
Oh, sorry. I did have a question, and it was with regards to the reduction of $8 million with regards to strategic land purchases that has been taken out. And what's the definition of a strategic land purchase, please? Because we have policy around our reserves going forward, in which strategically we have, if I remember rightly, Mark, we actually put in strategic land purchases for going forward for the future, alongside our growth, i.e. broadfields and other growth areas of purchasing land. Is that those strategic land purchases? What's the definition?
I think I've just been advised it's been put back in.
Oh, so basically the $8 million that's been taken out is now being put back in. So the information we're looking at is not correct.
There's a last minute decision. So we will update that.
Deborah, the reason that's been put back in, we are going through the strategic investment strategy with PwC. So we're leaving that amount in there just now. That will include investments and divestments, but we're leaving that amount in there just now to see what the outcome is of that workshop.
So just for references, I'm looking at 24.8, and that will, by taking that 8 million out, it might just have a little bit of flexibility, but on key changes with the rates, because I was looking at those all coming out. Now the 8 million's back in. It will just have a small impact.
That page, Deborah, is really just for councillors' information. It's not going to go to the community through the consultation. It's only here so that we could see how staff have responded to previous workshops.
But the 8 million on my copy,
on all of ours, it's not true, put a line through it.
Is back in. Okay, that's fine.
Yep. The other thing to note is that there's a couple of tables here. They've got lots of numbers on them. That just is what it is. So there's 3 new councillors and Megan. So 4 of us that are brand new to this process. This process has a lot of spreadsheets and numbers and is about information sharing in the best possible way. And the best possible way is still complicated to look at if you're not used to looking at spreadsheets. Without apologising for it being there, sorry if that makes it a little bit difficult to understand what's here. Some of the information presented today, though, was requested at the last workshop when we asked for what is not just the percentage increase, but what is also the dollar impact of that percentage increase on a particular targeted rate. And we are reasonably targeted rate heavy as a district. So when we are communicating it to our community, it's more complicated than if we just had a more simplified rating system and we could show things a little more simply. I think the discussion in particular was on the water rates last time where we said there's a 22% lift. Here you can see a 22% lift isn't a big dollar value change compared to say a 5% lift in some of the other targeted rates areas. So it's really again around transparency and sharing the numbers. Lydia.
Have you been?
Oh, sorry, have I got my light on?
Thanks. I guess I'm just sort of digesting some of the numbers in here, and you know, like looking at the refuge bin and whatnot. If in the long-term plan it states at $190, that will be an increased cost for green collection. But I guess that we've got an increase here. So by 2027, it's actually $250 for a bin. So I guess some of that was just around transparency of numbers and wondering if that is correct. And I'll take a stab for our rural ratepayers. Some of them currently pay between $30,000 and $70,000 already. And if we're looking at a 17% increase, that's an extra $5,000 to $12,000. And those people are going to be asking me, what do they actually see extra for $5,000 to $12,000? And my answer is not a lot for those people. And so I guess for a lot of my constituents, it's going to be a pretty tough sell. You know, these people would just like their roads looked after, some water at the gate, and they'd be happy with that. And that's their well-being. So yeah, something's not right with the way that the rates increase works in my world.
Lydia, thanks for raising that, because I think it's a good point for discussion for us all to face into, because rates is a very blunt tool and it doesn't represent ability to pay. Legislation is very defined into how it can be applied, and we could have a land value or a capital value approach. We've gone capital value, which is fairer than a land value, but there's no other tools to get us any closer other than the 30%, which we have used. And it's probably something someone else might want to touch on, is why we haven't gone 30% in year one. It might not make that much difference, but that's about the only way we can spread the cost out evenly on a per ratepayer basis rather than on a capital value charge. So those questions will be asked, and unfortunately there is legislation dictates that that's the way that we can charge our rates. You had a specific question around the waste piece, and I don't know if there's a response around the dollars and how they connect.
We'll have to come back to you.
We'll take a note on it.
Yeah, I think some of it was driven by changes in legislation, but that was my recollection. But we can come back to you and give an email back to all councillors on that particular question.
I think it's just good to be clear if we're talking about that green waste and we're saying it's $190, which it is at the moment. But if it's not been enacted until 2027, well, the dollar change is quite different.
So we'll clarify that for everyone.
Yeah. And I'd forgotten that I had something I wanted to bring up with Murray, was around the possibility of trying to merge water races and land drainage and whatnot, because a lot of our rural people are wanting to actually shut down water races and they don't want them anymore. And this is what I'm seeing this day to day in conversations with people my way, and I've already handed over a large group of people that want to close water races because they are no longer able to use them with farm environmental plans, and it will be even worse with freshwater management not that we know what that looks like, but effectively they don't want them. And they're not going to like to see that the price has been increased on them of something that they cannot use.
Yeah. Something like that.
So there's probably a couple of things there, and Councillor Grant Miller mentioned to me over lunch as well. So his question was, can we consult on closure of all water races as part of this LTP, except for a number of strategic races to remain open, and that way we can then go through and shut them down easier. So that's something we can consider and come back next week about that. In terms of the rate increases, there'd have to be a dramatic change in the way we rate for those services. Potentially, if one was to bundle them up, so you have one rate which covers all surface water, so you'd bundle up water races, land drainage and stormwater as one targeted rate and charge on it. Well, the UAGC is probably maxed out, so it'll probably be on a capital value. We could do that, which would be cheaper for farmers, but it will put more of that cost to the urban ratepayers, but not a large increase because there are a lot of ratepayers in the urban areas. So we could potentially look at that, but it's quite short term now. But we could. I've done some numbers roughly this morning, but it's probably not appropriate to talk about them now. We can come back next week if that's what we should be doing. But it has to be a dramatic change to our rating structure to bring down those water race rates, and it would have to be a bundling up against those three asset classes and rate singly through that process.
Yeah. I mean, I really want to see something in there for my rural community, and I know Grant's passionate about it as well. So it seems like the appropriate place to put this.
It may well be, Lydia, that there's an opportunity through the submissions for the rural community to come forward and speak and ask for council to look and explore those opportunities. If that's what you're hearing really strongly in your community, and other councillors with the rural, you're hearing the same thing, then what I would say is that I would expect that that's probably quite a perhaps strong theme to come through in the submissions to ask council to consider.
And the timing around that, you can rush something in the next week if you can, but we will have an annual plan that will come through in 12 months' time, which we'll start working on as soon as we receive the answers for this long-term plan. So let's make sure we consider it well. And I know, Mary, you've put a lot of thought into it already, but so that we can all be up to speed with what we're putting out to the community. The timing might need to be annual plan in response rather than long-term plan.
That's right. And if it comes through as a submission and councillors agree, and they can direct the CEO to work up what that would look like for the next annual plan, so that we do it properly rather than on the back of an envelope and rushed.
Okay, thank you.
Elizabeth.
It's a bit of a curly question, but if we have a property downturn in the market and our property values drop significantly, does this valuation that we have every 4 years here for our properties also drop? And if that does occur, then do our predictions change? How do we balance our predicting what we've predicted here with that kind of property?
No, it doesn't. So the property value that you have for your property only determines the proportion of total rates that you pay. So if all properties drop by 10%, everyone's rates remain the same. If some properties drops 2% and yours drop 10%, then yes, you'd pay proportionally less rates. But the total amount that we have to collect remains the same. We just use property values as a way of dividing up that amount of money. So I think people often see that. So if property prices increase 20% over the next few years, that doesn't mean everyone's rates increase 20%. People's rates only increase based on the projects that we put in and what we consult on through long-term plan and annual plans. Sophie.
Yeah, a lot of what I was going to ask has already been asked, or other things have spun off, so I'll try to be brief. I guess one question I had was around things like the swimming pool zone maps. I was trying to find a map and just wondering whether any of the changes that we're doing around facilities would change what that zoning is or the value of each zone, because Darfield Pool isn't what it was anymore, for instance. So has the proportion of how much they pay towards swimming pools changed? If it had, it wouldn't necessarily be a huge amount. It's just a question that I know a certain person in my community will be coming forward and asking. So I'm just putting this because it's going to come up.
So for the benefit of that person, the community will find that map and have it online.
Well, no, I did have another wee thing, just thinking in terms of, I guess I'm not a rural ratepayer anymore. I used to be, okay? And it does sometimes feel like you're not getting what you are paying for. But on the other hand, now living in the urban area, for instance, I don't have a water race and I don't have a land drainage scheme, but I'm paying towards them. So is everybody else in the urban areas. And even when I did live rurally, like there was a whole bunch of services that I used that were elsewhere. I didn't just need the road outside fixed, and roads cost a lot of money, I know now, which I did not know at the time. But you know, yes, rates are a really blunt tool, but at the same time, that is the way that we've got for providing these facilities. And actually, if whole swathes of stuff, if people had the chance to opt out of paying for them on the grounds that they thought they wouldn't need them, they would very quickly find out that they do want them. They do want them available, they want them clean, they want them resourced. So yeah, it comes around every single time, but it's still the best way we have available for paying for this stuff.
Thanks, Sophie. Deborah.
Thank you, Lydia, for bringing through the water rates. Looking at the targeted rate system that we've now developed, with regards to land drainage properties, we're charging $2.50 less or up to 4 hectares, but then we actually on-go charge $6. When we go to the water races per hectare, we're down to 170. So with a rough calculation, we have an annual water race charge of $32.20 being charged, whereas the annual land drainage rate is $6. And I'm just trying to, is that in a works charge with a user pays? Why the big differential? And is there an opportunity to reconfigure that like we did with the land drainage to make it just a bit more cost effective for the landowners?
Right.
He hasn't thought about that one, so I've just pulled that one out of thin air, but looking at it, but
It may look like I was daydreaming, but I was in deep thought. So this is
maybe I can discuss it offline and get back to it. He can get back
Take
to
it offline and make sure.
So these numbers aren't absolute numbers. These are the increases. So when you look at land drainage at $5, not paying $5, they're paying $5 more than what they were paying the year before. That's what my deep thought was, because the numbers didn't make sense at first glance.
Okay, so when we get down to the water race annual charge and you're looking at the increase at $32.20, but you're only looking at $6 for land drainage, is that the maintenance, is that the cost of the maintenance charge? Trying to work out why the big differential.
Yeah, so it is because the water races are more expensive to maintain than for land drainage. Yeah, so the cost increases are greater to recoup those costs.
And just for you that don't know, all water races are cleaned differently than land drainage now. There's a lot of cases in land drainage we don't clean, but we are after probably substantiating some of those increased costs because we've actually got to put in sediment traps. So
Thanks, Deborah.
So I'm just highlighting some of the differences between the two. Yeah.
Megan.
Yeah, really interesting to have this conversation about water races and land drainage networks from the lens of who pays for what. And even if the resources no longer, the natural resources no longer going to be used by the rural or farming community, does not mean that we don't continue to have responsibilities to actually protect the mana o te wai.
Yeah.
And so who pays for it might be a different question, but I take us back to slide 5, where we looked at the intercept of what's most important. And we did say that the natural environment and protection was most important. So that's going to cost us some money, regardless of who pays for it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, thanks for all the discussion on this today. It's been some heavy topics and heavy lifting. We appreciate the thought that's gone in. We'll be seeing the revised edition ahead of next Wednesday. And if we can, Sharon, think about the timing of the release of that to councillors to be able to be abreast and read it ahead of time as we develop the changes made today. Any final comments you'd like to make?
Firstly, thank you, councillors, for your time. It's been a long day, but very fruitful discussion. Thank you to the team for the great work that you've been doing. Yeah, we will tidy up the document. We've taken on board feedback. So we will bring the tidied up document or suggestions that you've given us back next week for another look. We're expecting the auditors to come in on the 5th of February to audit the LTP. So just to assist with understanding, when we come back next week, it will be a little bit challenging to make significant changes because obviously we have the auditors then coming in the week after. So if you come and say to us, well, we want you to rip out $30 million, that will, to be fair, provide a challenge. But however, if you know that's your governance decision. So we'll have the auditors in on the 5th of Feb, and then towards the end of March, we expect to bring the consultation document for final approval to the draft consultation document for approval to go out to our community. So next week, really, I'm not hearing anything from today that is vehemently opposed. It is really just about tidying, perhaps realigning, and making sure that we take on the nice guidance that you've given us, particularly around expanding the narrative and some of the other questions. So thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. And can I just note the next LTP workshop we've scheduled from 1 until 4, so it gives us 3 hours to look over it. That's slightly less time than we had today. And I'm guessing we've been through everything in enough detail today that 3 hours will be sufficient. So can I please ask that if you've got some particular questions that require some detailed answers, that you circulate those early and talk to staff and Sharon about those things, so we don't bog the meeting down in some things that could have been answered previously.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And I would say actually the point of contact is myself or Tim as the key execs.
Thanks, Tim.